Chapter 291, Gradual Changes. When the skies above returned to normal and the stars in the middle of day returned to regular sunlight, it signaled the end of the terrifying God's proclamations. Everyone was able to sigh in relief. Everyone present with me could easily sense a windstorm brewing on the horizon, and this wasn't even taking into account the possible impact of these proclamations. This came as a complete surprise for everyone, apart from Harlois, who had some prior knowledge of my plan. Even I was surprised, as I didn't expect Ayer to be decisive enough to break off from the God of Holy Light's faction. Consequences? Relationship with the Holy Light? Who cares about all that? Just do what you want. I'll back you up. Ayer's incarnation vanished after leaving me with that sentence. His casualness sometimes made me speechless, but I had to admit that he possessed enough power to not be afraid of the Holy Light faction. He had also always been incredibly perceptive, and now was indeed the best time to be choosing sides. The undead armies had arrived, and there was no more stopping their invasion of the mortal plane. It could be said that the Holy War had begun in all its glory. Acting as if we were the ones proclaiming the Holy War in order to grab everyone's attention was doubtlessly the critical point. Well, since the goal was to grab everyone's attention, it could also be called stealing the headlines. Right now, outside our forest, the situation hadn't changed. Undead armies from 6 undead planes had successfully arrived, and the area here had eternally transformed. The undead calamity was here, and no matter what the undead were motivated by, their next step was inevitable: war. Indeed, no matter if their reasons were excusable or not, or if they viewed their own actions as justified, this was still a war where the undead were the invaders. It was a major war that was destined to end with the loss of innumerable lives. The undead wanted to re-establish their country here. However, the Dark Republic had died long ago in the mortal plane, and this land now belonged to the Bardi Empire. While the undead may have the right to return to their homeland after thousands of years, wouldn't the citizens living here for the past thousands of years also have the same right to protect their own land? Quite often, wars didn't start because of so-called conflicts between good and evil. Wars were merely tools to fight for space to live in. A ruler could make his own retainers cooperate with dangerous terrorists, but no ruler in the world would be able to make their own citizens give up their homes. In fact, the moment any ruler tried to force their own citizens to do such a thing, he would be then viewed as their mortal enemy. Even his loyalist retainers would rebel. The citizens were able to accept a minor amount of intelligent undead as high-level nobles, but that didn't mean that they were willing to be ruled and enslaved by the undead. Mega empires had their own pride, and the Bardi people would naturally find it unacceptable to be ruled by outsiders. I didn't know what Osso's original plan had been, but now, since both sides' basic needs were in conflict, there was absolutely no way to mediate between them. Battle was inevitable. I'm returning to the capital. I need to ask His Majesty Orlos just what he's thinking. But even after learning about the undead, Hayland was still worried about the situation in the capital and insisted on returning there. All his dragon knights went with him, and in order to help Hayland firm his resolve in breaking with Emperor Orlos, I was kind enough to give him a research report on Casolan's tears along with the undead's likely future plans, such as the one where they turned the entire population into undead. Of course, my report contained plenty of questions about why the Bardi Empire's ruling class responded so slowly or pretended to ignore things, along with some advice on how Hayland could incite the citizens against Emperor Orlos. Hayland, Nightrain City needs to prepare for combat as well. When the undead finish their troop organizations, if they directly attack Nightrain City, you can consider contacting the Mage Country for assistance. The Mage Country is far likelier to assist you than the Bardi Empire. Right, since your opponent is the undead, don't forget to ask the Holy Church for assistance as well. They make excellent righteous cannon fodder. Hayland hesitated for a moment upon hearing my words but didn't say anything. It would seem that he had accepted what I said. Not that the undead calamity had commenced. The Dark Republic, Bardi Empire, and Mage Country were exactly like my system's quest described, infighting among 3 snakes. They were just like 3 gigantic boa constrictors tightly entwined with each other, fighting for living space as well as authority. The clash for benefits was unavoidable. The Bardi Empire and the Mage Country were already enemies to begin with, While the battle for living space between the living and undead had already occurred many times in history, it was practically a situation where each of the three countries were enemies with the other two. In fact, a three-way fight like this was common in the past. Stop it? Use what was there to stop it? Allow me to use a perhaps not entirely suitable proverb here. In front of the gears of history, any that tried to stop such a thing would be as foolish as a person who tried to stop a train with his body. Before, the battles were of a much smaller scale, so perhaps they could still be controlled. But when two powerful countries like the Bardi Empire and Mage Country went all out, and when the Tark Republic, which consisted of 6 undead planes and 12 surviving semi-god undead emperors, went all out as well, personal strength and even an entire military squad's strength became meaningless. This was now at the scale of a battle between major countries. In front of these three tremendous existences, the small amount I had in the Northlands wouldn't even compare to their little fingers. Even the martial arts technique of using an opponent's strength against them required one to have a certain amount of foundational strength to begin with. How could we compare when we were only a pinky finger? Try to mediate between them? That would only be possible once they had sacrificed enough for them to understand that they wouldn't be able to defeat their opponents without paying a small price. Or there would need to be a force powerful enough to suppress all three sides in order to force them to mediate. And, among the three sides, the undead Tark Republic would be the unjust invaders as well as the common enemy of the mortal plane. If they successfully grabbed land away from the Bardi Empire, the mortal plane's residents would find it unacceptable when the undead began large-scale slaughters of the living to create undead ingredients or transform the living into the undead. Of course, in the end, all three sides would want peace, but that would be impossible anytime soon. In that case, I might as well plant a seed for peace in the future. Instead, perhaps also saw through all this already. One of his goals in giving me these memories of his was perhaps to make me the third-party mediator when conditions allowed. Since I was considered Wumian's god envoy as well as a former undead emperor, I was probably a mediator that all sides would be able to accept. What also had wanted as the best result for the undead was to conquer over half of the Bardi Empire and then achieve peace with the other factions through negotiation. However, this goal of his would obviously be unacceptable to the Bardi Empire, nor would it be acceptable to the Bardi Empire's citizens who would lose their homes, family, and friends. The nobles wouldn't accept this, either. So that meant war. The undead would have to achieve their goals through use of force. The undead were still currently building defensive bases and organizing their troops. Their current behavior spoke volumes about their overall combat strategy. They would refrain from antagonizing additional factions if possible while gathering all of their troops in one go for a huge battle. And once they were fully prepared, with the rate at which the six-dimensional doors are increasing their soldiers, they will run out of space sooner or later. If the undead start expanding their territory, the Forest of Dreams to the west and Night Train City to the east will likely become the front lines of battle. Both these locations will become real lively soon. In a way, Halen's preparations weren't wrong. They would even serve a critical purpose in defending the Bardi Empire. If the Bardi Empire was going to defend against and fight the undead rather than accept their rule, then Night Train City was destined to become the farthest frontline fortress for stopping them. By that time, many of our contract heroes will probably come over to Night Train City to join in on the fun. On our side, the Forest of Dreams situation will change once again. I didn't think that the undead possessed the courage to attack the Forest of Dreams, since even the undead emperors knew how difficult it would be to deal with a dimensional will. Surrounding it without attacking it was the most appropriate strategy. However, that didn't mean that the Forest of Dreams wouldn't attack the undead. The Forest of Dreams was still a big problem for the Tark Republic's plans. The undead would obviously transform the area around the six-dimensional doors into their homeland, and it would become most important defensive base of all. However, there was just a single problem: the Forest of Dreams right next to them that had already become an independent dimension of its own. Not to mention that this forest was located at a formerly famous port, so the forest was right by the sea in an area that was easy to dock from. And right across from the sea was the Mage Country, making the Forest of Dreams the best frontline battle location of all. No matter if it was to help defend the living or to defend against future undead invasions, the Mage Country was certain to send people here eventually. It was even quite possible that a long-term naval route would be set up to the Forest of Dreams so that adventurers not belonging to any faction could conveniently come as well. The Mage Country will definitely come, and perhaps they'll even send several military squads over. Since this is a completely safe zone, it will also attract many who desire injustice points. No matter if it was because this was the place where the wood spirits originated or because this was going to be one of the frontline locations for the Holy War's battles, it would soon become a flourishing location with a huge uptick in population. Perhaps there would even be those that would greatly profit from the war, making this place into one of the grandest and most flourishing cities in the world. But as the frontline location of battle between the living and the dead, this place was also destined to undergo endless combat. The wood spirits would have to mature through warfare for a long time to come. As for the Holy War, the original enemies we had planned for weren't even actually the undead that suddenly descended. After all, even a year wouldn't be able to predict the exact timing of the undead's arrival. The main enemies were all the elemental life forms that would awaken together with the elemental gods. They wouldn't be strong at all, and they would be excellent for becoming practice enemies for newbies to help them grow. Eliminating these elemental life forms would also help suppress the elemental tide's increase, a good thing for the Holy War. The rather weak monsters for beginners were the most vital. They would deepen the connection between newbies and the Ayer faction and create the first step in a relationship of trust. The first batch of adventurers, aka the beta testers, that were successfully rewarded by us would become legends among other adventurers. They would attract more newbies to us and gradually increase the scope of my plan to turn the citizens of this world into game player-like existences. Elemental life forms bodies were also perfect magical ingredients, and they would help reduce our costs. This was why I strongly recommended listing elemental life forms to be marked as our primary enemies by the StarNet. Since the undead had already begun invading, it was impossible to not add them as enemies into our system. Hopefully the newbies knew how to run if they faced defeat against the undead. Both Night Train City and the Forest of Dreams had iron defenses. At the very least, newbies shouldn't meet the ultimate bosses and be instantly killed. As for the other already major field of battle, that was at an old familiar acquaintance's home, the All-End Empire's capital, Cajercy. The sea folk there were currently in a war of attrition with the humans, with the sea folk that worship the Queen of Storms obviously being the Chaos side and our enemies. They also met our requirements to be listed as enemies to be farmed for justice points. Of course, the sea folk weren't any easier to deal with than the undead when taking into account their combat strength in water. Those who weren't strong enough would be courting their deaths if they went. I mentioned my worry for the newbies to Harl Ois, but she was less worried than I was. Danger? Only with high risks will one obtain high rewards. Otherwise, why would they deserve the gods' rewards? Besides, we're not babysitters. All the warriors willing to sign contracts with us are adults that can take responsibility for their own decisions. You think our current opponents might be too dangerous for them? Won't our future opponents be even more dangerous? True top-level warriors can only be obtained from those who survive when everyone around them dies. Since improving power level has always been a competition for survival of the fittest, why are you hesitating? I suppose you're right. Since they're willing to fight on the front lines for the sake of exchanging justice points for the gods' rewards, they wouldn't be any commoners that have never even seen blood before. Of course they'd be mentally prepared. From a certain standpoint, I had indeed underestimated the citizens of this world. They lived in a different environment from me in my previous world. After all, warriors and adventurers were long since far different from commoners. So professional warriors who were used to fighting with their lives on the line in order to make a living wouldn't possibly be unprepared when getting ready to go to the front lines of battle. The rash that rushed to battle without knowing their own limits had long since died in action. Rather than considering such things, it was probably a better use of my time to think about how I wanted to deal with this battle between three huge countries that would have major repercussions. Obviously, doing nothing at all was something I wasn't accustomed to. Samantha, it seems your mother is still going to remain asleep for a while to come. But there are still things you all can do. With bright red hair, Temperance. Samantha was both the wood spirit's tribe leader and the oldest sister of the seven virtues. The strange part, however, was that even though she was transformed from the rose, the symbol of passion, she always had an icy expression and spoke as little as possible. Although she and Rosa were both transformed from roses, and she greatly resembled Rosa in physical appearance to the point of almost being twins, not to mention the three virtues that currently existed had all been living symbiotically with Amelia and knew much about me, Samantha was quite different from the friendly and hesitant Rosa. She seemed to quite dislike me, as a lack of expression was a good expression for her when she saw me, while an expression of distaste was more the norm whenever she talked to me. Well, you all will probably have many visitors coming here soon. Their target will mostly be the undead. I hope you'll be able to do three things. First, try to help as many of the visitors survive as possible. Second, provide resources to them that will attract them to stay here, for example, that fruit you have that can improve one's constitution. You can trade them to the visitors for just as points or large amounts of gold coins, but make sure you only give it to them in limited amounts. Third, learn communication skills for communicating with other species so that you can quickly adapt to living in this world. When talking about who had the most treasures, very few would be able to compare with Dimensional Will. This was just like how no small businesses would ever be able to compete with the government. While the former earned money, the latter printed money. A Dimensional Will was basically like the existence that printed money. Special fruits that could permanently increase one's basic stats of strength, dexterity, constitution, and so on. Nectars that could recover one's HP and mana stats. Antidotes that could cure the most vicious poisons, and so on were all available in this forest. While alchemy could create potions and antidotes to replicate the effects of the latter two products, items that could completely, and foundationally, improve a person's stats were exceedingly precious. Just this local specialty alone would attract countless strong individuals to come work for the wood spirits. Of course, such fruits weren't limitless. Fruits that could permanently increase one's basic stats required many resources for the forest to produce. They were limited. Amelia's Forest of Dreams power of creation was limited to only fruits and plants, so only the living that were capable of eating these fruits would benefit from them. As the Holy War continued, I extrapolated that perhaps justice points would become more valuable than even gold coins. Just this newly born currency alone, which represented glory as well as a way of doing business, was highly likely to increase the goddess of wealth Bana's divine power, giving her far more than what she spent to help us create the exchange system. And this was just the beginning. According to my plan, all of the true gods in the Ayer faction would greatly benefit from my plan in the end. I also knew that with every contract and every fair exchange, there would be an increase in the power of the concept known as contracts, along with Wumian's power as he was the guardian god of contracts. And after the recent god's proclamation, the faith of his believers would further increase, along with the believers' devoutness and the other gods that did the proclamation together. This is destined to be a long-term battle. Don't let the warriors die meaninglessly. This is also for your mother's sake. I wasn't lying about this. After all the corpses and souls that died here would become nourishment for the Forest of Dreams. As long as there was a sufficient number of blood sacrifices, not only would Amelia awaken, but she would be far more powerful than she was before. From a certain standpoint, the entire Forest of Dreams was now part of her physical body, and the entire wood spirit species was living in symbiosis with her. Samantha nodded at this. I suppose that meant she agreed. As I watched Samantha leave without a sound, I heaved a sigh of relief. Her glares at me were just too vicious, and the complaints and anger in her expression made me feel so uncomfortable, as if I owed her a lot. When I thought about everything I did in the past, which she probably knew about because of Amelia, I felt a mysterious sense of guilt. It made me feel like an irresponsible father that wasn't paying child support. Sister Samantha is quite delighted. She looks really happy that father wants her help. However, little Rosa came out to ruin her sister's image. What? That vicious expression was actually one of delight. Astonished, I hurriedly asked Rosa just how she knew. Father, you were unable to tell? Don't look at Sister Samantha's expression. Actually, she was so happy just earlier. Just look at how the vines behind Sister's head are jumping up and down, just like a dog's tail. Ah! Alright then. Vines suddenly reached out from a nearby tree, tying up and kidnapping Rosa. When I saw how the oldest sister Samantha had a face that was now turning red as she continued walking off, I felt like I understood these young wood spirits more than before. Meanwhile, by a small river, the first artificial construction in the Forest of Dreams was underway. Only 4 to 500 square meters, it was a tiny court constructed entirely of stone. It had 7 or 8 rooms, and was, indeed, the Church of Law's church branch and court in the Forest of Dreams. Its planned use, apart from being able to provide some justice points for the future contract warriors that would be coming here, was to spread the teachings of the Church of Law. It would even be able to help people enter law-related job classes, and as the divine concept of contracts continuously entered people's dictionaries, not only would ordinary merchants begin using contracts, adventurers and mercenaries would also start coming to the Church of Law as well. Team contracts would be a new popular product as well. As the church branch located on the front lines, who to make its head priest was nationally an important decision. I choose. Crows, are the preparations ready? Yes. The wood spirits are quite easy to communicate with, and they're quickly learning about law. I think that before long, the Church of Law will have its first group of wood spirit law job class members. Crows was smiling brilliantly, a beam of utter bliss. Apart from being able to work in a forest, a place all elves preferred to be, it was more because the wood spirits had promised to cultivate a special plant potion for her that could change her body. Alright, everybody probably figured it out already. It was just a plant potion version of the Spring of a Drowned Man, as it was indeed within the Forest of Dreams' power to produce such a potion. However, the rules were already set in stone. Even crows would need to earn justice points in order to exchange for such a potion. And since it was a custom order for her, it would probably be far more expensive than usual. I ended up deciding against hurting her morale by telling her what I was thinking when I saw how brilliant Rose's smile was as she busied herself with her work. The church's support will be here soon. With your popularity in the church along with all those abnormal fans of yours, I feel like even if you're willing to pay 10,000 justice points for that potion, your coworkers are willing to pay 30,000 justice points to prevent you from doing so. And even if you succeed in obtaining the potion of Spring of a Drowned Man, they'll develop the potion of Spring of a Drowned Girl just for you. Chapter 292, Newly Born Silver Species, Part 1 of 2. A white-winged bird-type magical pet landed in front of me with a letter for which I had been waiting a long time. It's finally here? The letter's contents were quite simple. There were only 2 sentences. I took care of things for you. The official invitation is inside, so hurry and come as soon as you can. The letter was a reply from my old friend and classmate Cade. It was only a matter of time before I went to the Cloud Tower in the Mage Country. What was really important was how I went. I would receive treatment that would differ depending on whether or not I had been invited. That was why I had written to Cade a while back, asking him to help me out. I divulged a bit about what was going on so that the Cloud Tower would officially send me an invitation. There were many things I needed to discuss with the Truth Overseers. However, not only did I have old friends amongst the Overseers, but I had many old enemies there, enemies who probably wanted me dead. In order to have an equal, and peaceful, status to communicate with them, I needed to give myself the identity of a diplomatic envoy. Not to mention that this diplomatic envoy status of mine would be quite real. After all, the wood spirits would definitely need to establish a relationship with the Mage Country. Their representatives would be me and Rosa. Why are you the one going? What about your sisters? Big sister Samantha didn't want to go, so she left it to me. Little sister Jill didn't want to go either. She told me to not bother her with anything that wasn't about battling. When I thought of the other 2 virtues, I recalled Samantha, who was always terse and vicious with her comments, and Jill, who seemed to be a battle maniac. Indeed, neither of them were appropriate for diplomacy, and that Rosa, who was always smiling, was probably the best choice among them. When I first arrived here, Rosa had also been the one to greet me. That pure and friendly smile of hers was indeed an excellent diplomatic tool, especially since she would be soon dealing with a group of old virgins, old artifacts, and since the elderly were always instinctively fond of, willing to protect young girls. This was obviously going to be a huge advantage. I could already predict the commotion that would happen when Rosa and the wood spirits appeared in the cloud tower. After all, the wood spirits would be considered cute by the beauty standards of any species, not to mention how the elderly always doted on young girls. Besides, the circumstances of their birth made it even easier to establish a friendly relationship with the mages. They were Amelia's daughters. No matter if it was because they were the creations of the Cloud Tower's rather famous, or infamous, depending on how you looked at it, Archmage Amelia, or simply because they were the first intelligent species in history created by a mage, the wood spirits would definitely be loved by the mages. Of course, the fact that they all appeared to be cute young girls would add points in their favor, and for certain groups of people, it would be super extra bonus points. There's nothing wrong with being a gentleman pervert. A forever youthful, young, wife was the dream of all men, wasn't it? Cough. Setting those subjective factors aside, just from the objective and tangible benefits, the mage country would not only want to establish a friendly relationship with the wood spirits, but they would even look forward to a formal alliance. Although the wood spirits weren't all that numerous as a species yet, they were an entirely new silver species. Their current power levels and future potentials were astonishing. With the holy war right at everyone's doorsteps, why would they refuse such a strong ally? Of course, there might be those with ambitions of stealing from or conquering the wood spirits. Not every truth overseer was the type who only cared about the secrets of magic. The wood spirits would have to make a display of sufficient power. That was why I was in no rush at all. The first impression was the most important. The first time that the wood spirits were shown to the world would be critical. Rather than rush to show everyone but then be looked down upon, it would be better to arrogantly arrive late. People would remember them much more clearly. Wood spirits also had astonishing potential as they were a silver species, something incredibly rare in today's age. This wasn't the ancient era where silver species were incredibly common. This was an era of iron bloodlines, where the humans of the Iron Tribe, 1, dominated the world. There were incredibly few silver species in today's world. The most obvious examples were probably the 4 elven aristocracies, but the superior elf species mostly consisted of the elven kingdom's royalty and nobles and were incredibly few in number. The only silver species with a high population, the dark elves, had weaknesses such as their fear of light. Moreover, after they fell into depravity and transformed into dark elves from night elves, their racial talents tilted far too much towards the mage job classes and lacked the ability to perform in other job classes. Some people already considered them to be a relatively strong bronze species. Every single wood spirit was, at the minimum, in the silver rank. In the Forest of Dreams, wood spirits would be improved to the upper tiers of silver rank and could even reach the lower tiers of the gold rank with the assistance of the forest's magical plants and strengthened outer shells. That was my assessment of the wood spirit's potential as a species, and Ayer, too, had agreed with me. When taking the average potential of a species in the world of Ike, the wood spirits were considered top class. In case my words weren't enough to make people understand, I could show them a comparison between the wood spirit's base stats and other species' base stats in order to make them easily understand just how scary wood spirits really were. Average beastman berserker stats: 15 strength, 8 dexterity, 12 constitution, 8 intelligence. Main stat: strength. Racial talent: frenzy. The stronger warrior tribes among the beastmen species only reached the level of a bronze species, and their racial talents were far too much tilted in favor of strength, so over 90% of beastmen could only choose melee combat job classes. Average human warrior stats: 12 strength, 8 dexterity, 10 constitution, 10 intelligence. Main stat: strength. Racial talent: none. This was the stat spread of an average human, which was even more pitiful than a beastman's. However, the only advantage was that without any particular racial talents or overwhelming unbalanced stat spread, humans could enter any and all job classes as they weren't limited by a species' natural talents. However, any future development down their chosen paths would depend entirely on themselves. Human bloodlines contained nothing to help them out. However, silver species were rather ridiculous. Most people treated the bronze species of beastmen, Northland's barbarians, dwarves, and wild elves as the upper limits of what a powerful warrior species was supposed to be. However, There was one species commonly ignored by people that was actually an incredibly common silver species, the giants. The most common mountain and forest giants would be 5 to 10 meters tall after reaching maturity, giving them the power level of average silver ranks. Meanwhile, the relatively stronger permafrost giants and flame giants were in the upper tiers of the silver rank, while some of the strongest giant species such as the cloud giants and magma giants typically had various racial talents that controlled the elements after reaching maturity. They were naturally born as talented in both physical and magical aspects, and these strongest giant species were gold species equal to dragons in power. Of course, there was also a huge difference in power level amongst all the dragon species. The weakest white dragons wouldn't know how to fight in any way other than melee combat until they reached the level of ancient. White dragons had incredibly low intelligence, equal to that of a normal wild beast. Although they technically counted as a gold species as they were dragons, they were infamous for their weakness to live up to the name. Meanwhile, the strongest among the commonly seen dragon species, gold dragons and red dragons, would easily be capable of defeating and killing 3 similar-aged white dragons in a 1-on-3 fight. And there were legendary dragon species above them such as the rainbow dragons, force dragons, and time dragons, against which even gods would need to be careful. As for the strongest giant species, the Titan giants, it was rumored that they were the creators of all other giants. There was a huge difference between them and the other giant species. Nobody would object if they were labeled as a double diamond bloodline species. That was because the strongest Titan giants were powerful enough to slay gods. Fortunately, this world was no longer a world where Titan giants reigned supreme, and the legendary dragon species had almost gone entirely extinct as well. According to records in history, in the ancient war of stone giants, the giants had rebelled against the gods and lost. So, Casodia, the god of intelligence in that era, cursed the giants to lose their intelligence, which nationally meant the giants lost their hope to reach the pinnacle of power levels. The few remaining giant species that retained their intelligence typically hid out in snowy mountains and magma-filled volcanoes. But I knew that as the Holy War continued, they wouldn't remain inactive for much longer. Average hill giant warrior stats: 19 strength, 10 dexterity, 20 constitution, 3 intelligence, cursed down from 10. Main stat: strength. Racial talents: earth affinity, high speed regeneration, stone skin armor, earthquake spell, rare, curse of low intelligence, negative racial talent. From this, it could be seen that if it weren't for the fact that giants had far too low intelligence, hill giants, a typical giant species, had racial talents far surpassing most common species in Ike today. As for why they had always been considered easy opponents that even a team of 2 or 3 silver-ranked adventurers could deal with, it was mainly due to their overly low intelligence. Not only did they fall too easily for all sorts of traps, they were unable to cultivate in any job classes and could only pitifully rely on their own racial talents to grow. If only giants could easily learn all sorts of martial arts, mature giant warriors would be able to easily defeat human gold-ranked warriors, and sword saint giants would easily be able to slay dragons. Dragons would no longer be the top species of Ike due to their racial talents. By the way, in a certain historical moment, the fallen titans returned and regained the giants' lost intelligence, so these muscleheads became incredibly scary. That game expansion was known as Attack of the Titans. Fine then, the game company was probably trying to profit off of the popularity of the anime Attack on Titan. 2. Getting back on topic, the wood spirits were also a silver species but didn't have any natural weaknesses like the giants did. Their base stats were ridiculous. Average wood spirit stats: 16 strength, 14 dexterity, 12 constitution, 14 intelligence. Racial talents: soul connection to all wood spirits, evolution by devouring, forbidden to use except when lives are endangered, unyielding spirit, incarnation of wrath, plant communication, forest traveling, the ability to enter trees, eternal rebirth, limited to only being effective within the forest of dreams. As Amelia's created species, those seemingly frail bodies possessed combat strength matching that of giants. Their much higher intelligence, as well as the racial talent of unyielding spirit, allowed them to easily enter mage job classes in addition to warrior job classes. Their basic stats were well balanced, which allowed them to choose their own personal paths of development just like humans could. So, even though I now had the invitation to the cloud tower that I wanted, I wasn't in any hurry. We had the right to be as late as we wanted, and making them wait would even benefit our negotiations. No rush. Let's help the wood spirits improve their foundation. The first present that Amelia gave them was the virtue of humility, which was the power for them to continuously improve themselves through high-speed learning. They would all be capable of entering any job class they wished to improve their potential and themselves. Although this wasn't listed as one of their racial talents, it was actually the most important present of all. Although the wood spirits' strength and dexterity values were quite high, and they were talented at quickly mastering martial arts, I soon discovered that they were still unsuitable for melee combat job classes. Why? Actually, it was quite easy to understand the reason. Everything was Ren's fault, the fault of them being only 1.2 meters tall. Although it's a bit awkward to say this, if you're so short it'll be disadvantageous for you to wield weapons like other species. If melee combat is absolutely necessary, you can consider relying on the strengthened outer plant shells of yours, instead. Indeed, the most important talent necessary for martial arts was a powerful and large body. The small bodies of wood spirits that were like young girls' bodies would be a critical weakness for melee combat job classes. When they fought with others, the wood spirit's sword would be more than 1 meter away from the enemy's body when the enemy's weapon reached the wood spirit's neck. There was simply too large of a disadvantage in reach. A beastman's sword saint's whirlwind slash attack would be able to slay 100 of his enemies in one attack, while a giant's whirlwind slash attack could create a true windstorm and slay 1,000 humans in one attack. A tiny wood spirit sword saint using the same whirlwind slash attack would have an effective radius of only 1.5 meters, and it was likely for all her enemies to run away without getting injured and her being unable to catch up due to her short legs. However, Amelia seemed to have taken this into consideration. The symbiotic magical plants and strengthened outer shells of theirs were doubtlessly items to help them make up for their weaknesses in melee combat. With the assistance of these items, the wood spirits would still be able to enter melee combat job classes just fine. Meanwhile, they were also quite talented at learning magic. The wood spirits entered the mage job class at an astonishing ratio of 1%. Back in the day, the mage country even established bases in all the elemental planes in order to find more potential mages from the life forms in those planes. If they knew that this new wood spirit species that lived so close to them had such astonishing talent in magic, they would probably go crazy. However, the most suitable job classes of all for the wood spirits were naturally the job classes related to nature and the forest. The wood spirits were especially talented at using druids' nature divine arts and elves' nature magic. It was as if they were born to become druids and nature priests. Eagle Storm was absolutely delighted to meet so many with excellent druid potential. He busied himself every day, teaching them about that druid sect of his. Soon, however, I was no longer able to take it. I found a chance and caught him, giving him a vicious beating. I already tolerated it when you taught them terrorist philosophies such as the safety of the forest is more important than humanity because humanity is a pestilence upon this world, since they're quite open to hearing this and it's not entirely wrong. But you even dared to teach them your Wild Bull Druid Alliance's outrageous philosophy about not wearing clothes? Do you really want to see the wood spirits running about naked that much? You're not afraid that I'll really kill you? But those are our teachings. Didn't you say before that as long as we didn't break any laws, we had the freedom to believe whatever we wanted? No. Definitely no. You can kill me or beat me, but I refuse to change my beliefs. Eagle Storm was crying with his bruised face as he adamantly insisted on his own beliefs. Fine. Freedom? That means it doesn't matter who goes to teach them. I'll have crows teach them, instead. After all, she's also a windstorm archdruid, equal to you. I pretended to leave, but, in reality, my goal was to force Eagle Storm to make some concessions. After all, based on my understanding of crows, her windstorm archdruid mastery came from the elves' teachings, and her main knowledge of druidic magic was only at the level of summoning windstorms. She didn't know anything about the druid's most powerful nature and transformation divine arts at all. Eaglestorm, on the other hand, was a master of both nature and transformation divine arts. Don't, I'll change it. How about changing it to wood spirits are the children of nature, so plants are part of their physical body. Covering yourselves with leaves and vines are fine and don't count as wearing clothing? This time, it was my turn to be astonished. This fellow who was so devout on his own beliefs changed them so easily. You're not afraid of others in the Wild Bull Alliance giving you trouble? No. I'm one of the creators of the Wild Bull Alliance, not to mention I'm now an archdruid as well. Then why don't you also change the absolute rule against human druids wearing clothes in your alliance? That will make it much easier for you to recruit new human druids. Never. That's exactly why I created the Wild Druid Sulphur Mountain Branch Alliance. To be openly naked was the only reason I had so many conflicts with all the other archdruids. You can kill me, you can beat me up, but I'll never wear clothes. I didn't even know what to say anymore. So all the druidic sect's internal conflicts and arguments between belief systems stem from this guy's personal desires. It's fine to do whatever you want when there are only you guys, but if you dare to go around naked in front of the young wood spirits, or if you dare to teach them to go around naked, I'll. Gentlemen, perverts, were never fearing death type. I thought for quite a while but couldn't think of anything that Eaglestorm and his alliance's gentlemen would be afraid of. So, I decided to test something, an experimental punishment of sorts. I'll force you to transform into an animal and lock you up with Bei-Feng. Are you afraid yet? Ha! Bei-Feng has been busy playing with magical plants as of late. The past 2 days, I've seen him chasing after a 3-headed piranha plant. As long as he has a target to focus on, he'll be quite difficult to distract within this period of time. What are we afraid of? I found it even more difficult to come up with anything now. I was even getting a bit curious that even though those wood spirits were so cute, I actually hadn't received any complaints about Bei-Feng yet. So it turned out that he had developed new interests and ways to play around yet again. I suppose it was impossible for ordinary people like me to understand Bei-Feng's world, after all. Wait, Eaglestorm actually understood Bei-Feng so well? I suppose gentlemen, perverts, always understood each other the best, as expected of jail buddies from Sulphur Mountain City who picked up soap together. I feel like you're somehow looking down on me. I remember that druids like you are able to transform into trees as well. As long as you imitate and have a good enough relationship with something living, druids are capable of transforming into it. I recall that recently, you've been interacting plenty with the piranha plants yourself. Please, no. I'll obey your commands. Fine then, the archdruid finally surrendered. I was still hesitating about whether or not I should just toss Bei-Feng out to feed the undead in order to prevent his negative influence upon the young wood spirits when Bei-Feng gave me a nice, expected surprise. Notes: 1. Ed/N. This was mentioned in Chapter 12. 2. Ed/N, a Japanese manga series. Fun fact, the manga has 71 million copies in print, making it one of the best-selling manga series. Source: Anime News Network. 3. Ed/N. Ran Yeager is the protagonist of the Attack on Titan manga series. There could possibly be some sort of joke over here, but since neither Imperfect Luck nor I have watched Attack on Titan, we aren't sure. Chapter 293, Newly Born Silver Species, Part 2 of 2. The Great Stone Sculptor Rainslow and the others want to live here? This was rather surprising to hear, but it seemed that the environment and living conditions here fulfilled their requirements. Out of the blue, the Earth Elemental Lords that had come with Bei-Feng had made a request to live here in the Forest of Dreams. They were 6 existences at the Saint rank and above, especially Ainslow, who possessed the power to fight for the mantle of the next Earth Elemental God. She was one of the strongest Earth Elemental Lords in existence. So of course I wanted to know why these 6 Earth Elemental Lords wanted to live here. But first, I needed to stop myself from laughing. Are you intending to live here as well? That'll be wonderful. I mean, I'll miss you so much. Yes, that was what I was so happy about. After all, the 6 Earth Elemental Lords were currently in the Dragon's Soul world. If they all stayed behind here in the Forest of Dreams, Wouldn't that mean that this bastard would need to remain behind as well? Although I felt apologetic towards the inhabitants here, I didn't really care so much since Bei Feng wasn't interested in the wood spirits. No, milord. Only my sister and 5 brothers are going to stay here. I can't be without you, because I'll always meet wondrously strange species when I'm with you, so I'll continue following and serve you, in order to seek new food, milord. Ah, please don't stomp on me. He even tried to intentionally hug me as he said so, and then, did you really think I didn't understand what you meant? That's what you get for making me so disgusted with you. After beating him up in order to vent, I finally moved on to the main topic. It turned out that the Earth Elemental Lords felt this environment to be quite suitable for them to live in even without Bei Feng's soul world support, and it was far more comfortable compared to his tiny soul world as well. They hoped to be able to sign and become contract warriors and fight for injustice points in order to obtain the right to live here. Based on the magical system of this world, earth, water, fire, and wind, the 4 major elements, were the foundation of everything. Just as how ice magic was a branch of water magic, nature magic, which controlled plants, was, of course, a branch of earth magic. This small dimension filled with nature magic would naturally be beneficial to the Earth Elemental Lords. From a certain standpoint, being able to strengthen the Forest of Dreams defenses was a good thing. Not to mention that only by making it possible for the Earth to move together with the trees would the Forest of Dreams truly be able to truly become a moving, living forest. If the Earth Elemental Lords help out, I would get help in realizing some of my plans for the Forest of Dreams. The forest's defenses would be improved several fold as well. However, the problem was, are they reliable? Bei Feng, tell me the blunt truth. Do you trust them? Captain Roland, although they're my sworn brothers and sister, and that Ainslow indeed treats me quite well, I truly don't trust them at all. Since they were willing to rebel against Immortal Lorcan, it's only normal for them to rebel against us later on as well. Not to mention, Ainslow is quite ambitious, she really desires to become the new Earth Elemental God. From a certain standpoint, Bei Feng Herald, who had been with me since Sulphur Mountain City, was actually one of my closest and most trusted retainers. When I heard him say this, I actually relaxed somewhat. At least Bei Feng knew the situation as well and was even willing to tell me directly, which meant Bei Feng could still be considered trustworthy. I long since knew that those Earth Elemental Lords were not worthy of my trust. After all, I had been the main culprit behind the Earth Elemental Lords suffering in the first place, having destroyed the Earth Elemental throne so that no new Earth Elemental God could be born for the next several hundred years, at least. From a certain standpoint, it could even be said that Ainslow was forced to leave her home because of me. Even I wouldn't believe it if they said they had no grudges against me, but she and the others hadn't mentioned anything and even became super obedient, which made me all the more vigilant against them. Although they weren't reliable or trustworthy, their powers would be far too useful for this forest. If the Earth Elemental Lords truly helped out, they would massively speed up my plans for fortifying the defenses here. According to my expectations, the wood spirits didn't even need to live on the surface. The surface could be left to the magical plants and the soon-to-arrive visitors. They would become the first line of defense against an undead invasion, and the wood spirits that had the talent of plant communication would basically be able to live on top of the divine trees. That was what the wood spirits called these towering trees that almost reached the clouds, and enjoy the fun of I can hit you but you can't hit me. Actually, the development for this had already begun. There were various rope bridges tied across the divine trees, and in order to increase the speed at which they could ascend and descend such great heights, rope elevators had been installed in the hollow centers of the divine trees. Every day, countless wood spirits were choosing their new homes and thinking of ideas on how to decorate them in a camouflaged fashion so that nobody could see their homes from the ground. By the time they were finished, the wood spirits would no longer need to appear on the surface. It could be said that if the wood spirits didn't wish to see someone, that person could walk through this entire forest without seeing a single wood spirit. But just this alone wasn't enough. The wood spirits still needed a safe hideout and home, and it would be best if they also had a fixed marketplace for trading with other species as well. However, it wouldn't be safe to place these core structures on the wide open treetops. After all, if there were any aerial attacks, The wood spirits may be able to escape into the trees, but the structures would be unable to move. Since the skies are no good, let's go underground. Immortal Lorcan's underground labyrinths in Anshion and the Earth elemental plane had given me a deep impression. I wanted an underground labyrinth that spread throughout under the entire forest, creating an entire underground world that only the wood spirits knew how to traverse. If this really succeeded, it would mean that anyone who managed to conquer this forest still wouldn't be able to touch the wood spirits. Although I had my plans set for this already, and magical plants were quite skilled at digging, it would obviously take many years to complete. It would also cost an astronomical amount of resources and labor. And even if it was completed, it probably wouldn't compare to the Earth Elemental Lord's underground palaces, as they were all digging specialists. After all, Immortal Lorcan took only 1 or 2 short months at Anshion to create such a large-scale underground labyrinth that was so solid and defensible. We wouldn't be able to achieve this level of digging skill even if we had 10 years. However, Bei Feng's 6 Earth Elemental Lord brothers, and 1 sister, were all at the same rank, and if they started digging together, they would probably far surpass Immortal Lorcan, who wasn't even in his best condition at the time. I even impulsively wanted to reconsider my overly conservative plan and make a 999-floor gigantic underground labyrinth to make any possible invaders suffer to death. I would make it obnoxious to the point where the exit was right in front of someone with just a wall in between, but it would require 2 weeks to reach. Despite the fact that it was only 999 floors, I would write on the entrance, "Enter the 1000-floor labyrinth if you dare." That wasn't all. I planned on making other obnoxious labyrinth obstacles, such as uphill paths that made one notice that they had accidentally returned to the first floor, with a sign saying "Hero, please try again." Or, the invader would finally make it all the way through the final floor after following all the clues, but then would find out that an item near the first floor's entrance was required in order to truly reach the end. Excerpt from Archmage Victor's lecture, More Than 1000 Years in the Future. By the way, Roland Mist really accomplished his dream. This endless labyrinth filled with disgusting traps and terrible psychological tricks became the most hated adventuring grounds of all. It was nicknamed the labyrinth that only a moron would enter. As the creator of such a labyrinth, Roland Mist's name was cursed by countless people. Since I was currently so passionate about creating a terrifying labyrinth, Ainslow and the other Earth Elemental Lords' offer to stay here was a huge boon. However, such a secret undertaking wasn't suitable for untrustworthy outsiders to handle for us, nor was there a rush to complete this. "Sure, we accept." "There's no reason not to accept." I agreed immediately, but I was actually thinking about how to test the Earth Elemental Lord's sincerity. If they were truly sincere about helping us, that would be the best case scenario. If they had other things in mind, then this was also a perfect opportunity to see what they were plotting and deal with that. "How's the progress in the airships?" The Ivy League's completion is slightly over 50%. The Mizar's modifications haven't been going smoothly and will probably take longer than expected. As I walked in the forest and looked at the humongous trees around me, it gave me the mistaken impression that I had become tiny. Meanwhile, in the area of the forest by the sea, docks were already beginning to be constructed. All the land routes to the Forest of Dreams were currently blocked by the undead. If the wood spirits wanted to contact the outside world, it was only natural for them to turn to water and air routes. Ships would be absolutely necessary. Amelia quite obviously didn't know how to manufacture airships, which naturally meant that the wood spirits didn't know, either. It was up to me to give them the technology and knowledge to create airships. Of course, they didn't have the necessary materials or smiths for airships, but, just as how I had used undead materials to substitute for certain materials, they were capable of using plant materials to do the same. It was just that the wood spirits' construction methods would remain incomprehensible to outsiders. I named their first airship the Ivy League, and it was equal in strength to any one of my 7 airships of the Big Dipper Squadron, for example Mizar. The Ivy League was 300 meters long, and if you stood the airship up vertically, you would discover that it was actually just a gigantic hollowed-out tree. The outer bark's hardness, however, far surpassed that of ordinary steel. Right now, the Ivy League was undergoing detailed modifications. The large tree leaves were being transformed into a windsail and mast, while roots tied everything together as the support. With its outer appearance making it appear just like an ancient tree, it was a rather wood spirit-like airship. The large majority of its attacking mechanisms were hidden under the tree bark. After all, this was, indeed, a tree, a living tree, a divine tree that had just been uprooted. It was a skyscraper pine tree. Named by me. Yes, this was their unimaginable technology. All their airships only needed to be planted. This tremendous pine tree I called the skyscraper pine tree was the wood spirit's favorite type of tree to live in. This particular tree had been hollowed out, through special methods. It had been created by the Forest of Dreams itself. Of course, apart from the Ivy League, which would become the first ship in the wood spirit's airship fleet, there were also divine tree candidates such as the original bamboo and grand peach tree and so on. Yep. Those strange names were all created by me, weren't they great? This was a far too convenient method to create airships. If it weren't for the fact that these unimaginably large trees would begin withering after leaving the Forest of Dreams for too long and would eventually die, making it impossible to take them on long-distance trips, I would have immediately created several hundreds of these divine tree airships. The Ivy League will die if it doesn't return to the Forest of Dreams in 6 months. And it will start weakening if it doesn't return in 3. One can't get quality goods for a cheap price after all. In that case, the wood spirit's air fleet will only be able to be used in this nearby area. Still, it'll make an excellent airship fleet for defensive battles at least. Meanwhile, the Mizar was also undergoing modifications at the under-construction docks. We obtained plenty of Hydra hide from the 7-headed water dragon, Hydra, from the earlier fight with the Queen of Storms, and its heart had already become the Mizar's backup engine. Since the Mizar was designed in the exact same way as the Borealis, it was compatible with the same technologies for powering up. Now that the Mizar had put on a layer of Hydra skin and Hydra body parts, it had become a lot more similar to the Borealis. At the moment, I had just finished my future blueprint for the Forest of Dreams. I temporarily divided the forest into 6 districts. The wood spirit's residential area would be amongst the tallest trees of the forest, their divine trees. This district would be intricately connected by endless rope and wooden bridges and would be where the wood spirits primarily resided. It would likely become a forbidden zone for other species. The docks district would be where endless amounts of airships and naval ships parked. There would also be the business district, located not far away from the docks, which would be where outside species merchants gathered. There was also the divine district, where all the gods' churches would be welcome, even if there was only a lonely Church of Law's Stone Court and Church right now. Of course, this would also become the service district for all Holy War-related issues. The central district would be for the future adventurers and Forest of Dreams residents. Although this was currently nothing but empty land, in the future it would likely become the most populated and largest district of all. Various basic necessities stores, entertainment options, and public facilities would be set up here. The 6th and final district was the underground labyrinth that was still a mere blueprint in my mind, but it would be exclusively for the wood spirits. When the Ivy League is ready, we're going to head out. While I was patiently waiting, I received an unexpected visitor, an envoy from the Tark Republic Undead. Their intent to hold talks with me. Chapter 294. Miss Target. I received the Tark Republic's Undead Envoy group in an empty clearing outside the Forest of Dreams. In many cases, diplomatic envoy groups were no different from spies scouting out information. Even if many things weren't considered top secret, I still didn't want to show them to the Tark Republic. Holly the 12th? What a strange name. Your Majesty, we possess our very own naming system. Perhaps other species consider our names strange, but to us, they represent our entire lives. The main envoy was a vampire marquis. Tall, white, and handsome, he was clad in ancient black ceremonial attire and held a black staff in his hands. He slowly yet clearly articulated each sentence in a logical manner, although his speech was somewhat archaic with an ancient accent. Despite his young appearance, he resembled an old-fashioned aristocrat. As for him calling me Your Majesty, that was without any formality at all. It was just the typical way the undead respected semi-god undead. It would seem that they had long since known the fact that I was young. Actually, I had already resolved myself to this, as some things were impossible to conceal from everyone. If I was an undead emperor exiled from the mortal plane, I would have been really interested in the only new undead emperor to arise in this recent generation, thinking of every method I could to obtain all possible information on him. Although he was quite deep in enemy territory and surrounded on all sides, the envoy, Halu the 12th, was quite gracious and seemed to be an experienced diplomat. With warm passion in his seriousness, his behavior revealed an elegance that only time and accumulated experience could have given him. In fact, there was nothing wrong with his manners, and perhaps we were the ones being a little rude, as we didn't even invite him inside the forest and had casually found him a small wooden stool for him to sit on. Let's get to the point. What are you here for? I don't have the time to be playing word games with you. In spite of my bluntness, this vampire mark was undead, who was, at the minimum, at the saint rank, maintained his smile as he shook his head slightly. Of course, we would not waste your majesty's time with trifling matters. My main purpose on this very day, apart from presenting you the greetings from the other undead emperors, was, in sooth, a small matter that I would like to ask Lady Graya. Not me, but Graya. I had pretty much guessed at what they wanted. And the next moment, when Halu stated his goal, my prediction was proven correct. You want to ally with the Zayuo Empire? Since the Zayuo Empire was an undead country like the Tark Republic, in a way they were the only possible ally for the Tark Republic in the entire world. Also, don't judge Graya by how unreliable she seemed when she was with me. As the former 4th senator, in a situation where the 1st and 2nd senators had been deposed and the 3rd senator Harlois was missing, Graya was indeed the number 1 ranked individual under Omar. Even Lionheart, the current Zayuo Empire's prime minister, would have to respect her opinions on every matter. When I turned around to look at Graya, who was standing beside me, she cast a casual glance in my direction before faintly lowering her head. She remained behind me, and this was an obvious indication of her giving me the right to answer for her. It's even better to be able to discuss this personally with you. Halu's elegant smile remained unflustered upon seeing this. Not even a hint of surprise shone upon his face, as if he had long since guessed at this outcome. Well, his tricks didn't need to be stated out loud. In a way, the Zayuo Empire had already become one of the most important parts of the future Mist Alliance, and any perceptive individual would be able to figure out who really was behind the Mist Alliance. But, from a certain standpoint, this was also a standard diplomatic tactic, to test whether the Zayuo Empire was still under Emperor Yang Ai's control. In front of such a sly veteran diplomat, Graya had instantly revealed the truth that I was still in charge, as she was used to only thinking about combat matters. Alliance? Do you really think it's possible? It had been quite difficult for me to get the other Northlands countries to begin accepting the Zayuo Empire. However, the Tark Republic, which was invading the mortal plane, was basically the enemy of every single country in like. The moment the Zayuo Empire allied with the Tark Republic, Zayuo would likely be viewed as the same as the Tark Republic, which would waste all of my previous efforts. As ancient undead who haven't been back to their homeland for a long while, we find it quite fortunate that we have been able to see another undead country in our original home of the mortal plane. We're even more delighted to see that the Zayuo Empire's citizens have achieved a peaceful relationship with the living. We understand that your country hasn't had it easy in a world filled with enemies, but, at the very least, allow us to express our friendliness to plant a seed of opportunity for the future. His words were rather roundabout and slightly difficult to understand, but to express it in an easier manner, he was basically saying, even if we can't become official allies now due to the circumstances, we're simply here to express our friendship, and we just want to improve our relationship. It would seem that Halu was indeed an expert diplomat. From the very start, he didn't say anything useless like, "We promise to not attack the wood spirits," or something as foolish like, "We'll pretend that Emperor Oso's death didn't happen." Instead, he had jumped directly to the main topic. His directness and sincerity had actually given me a good first impression. After all, due to the unique and unavoidable geography of this region, the conflict between wood spirits and the undead was practically unavoidable. Not to mention, Emperor Oso's death would definitely be no small ignorable matter for the Tark Republic, and it would only be natural to blame us for it. Since the conflict between both sides was unavoidable, With battle the only result in the future, saying something so obviously fake like, "We won't have any conflicts anymore," would be nothing more than an insult to both sides' intelligence. Unfortunately, many of this generation's diplomats like to pretend to be fancy with their words, saying only pretty words they felt their targets wanted to hear. Not only would they be unable to fool their targets, they would be all the more despised. But, if it was only to express their friendliness, there would have been no need for this vampire marquis to personally come here. I didn't pry and merely sat there quietly, sipping my tea and waiting for him to speak up. Finally, Halu was unable to wait any longer, and his tone contained disgust and absolute loathing as he spoke again. "Gricasio, as long as we obtain his head, the Tark Republic is willing to pay a large price. We're even willing to give up on this forest and the entire surrounding area." Alright then, I should have already guessed it. This was the critical point that Halu was here for. I could understand the Tark Republic's anger. Emperor Oso's choice to sacrifice himself for the sake of the Tark Republic when facing a powerful enemy would be considered a warrior's honor. Insulting the powerful enemy would be the same as insulting Oso himself, so Halu and the Tark Republic were still able to respect me even if we were enemies. However, there was one type of individual that would never be forgiven: traitors. Gricasio had already received generous gifts of knowledge from all the undead emperors, which helped him get much closer to reaching semi-god rank, but this meant that Gricasio had to help the undead emperors in turn. Not only that, the undead emperors hadn't placed many restrictions on him, mostly due to their trust in his power. Undead were undead because of their stubbornness, and top-level undead all had their own pride. Their power levels acted as the best name cards and self-introductions. The stubborn top-level undead all had their own pride and self-respect. Semi-god undead might be insane, foolish, and deceitful, but it was impossible for a top-level undead to not have their pride and basic morals. From a certain standpoint, this was considered as common sense by all undead. However, they just happened to meet an exception. Perhaps Gricasio's stubbornness that was keeping him alive was his desire to never die. As long as he could continue living, he was willing to do anything, no matter how shameless. Even though Halu's request sounded quite reasonable, I didn't even consider it, shaking my head directly in refusal. "I didn't even need to consider this matter." Halu nodded. He seemed to have expected this answer. "We can understand your desire to protect him. Please inform Gricasio that we consider him our mortal enemy, and the day he leaves this forest is the day of his death." Halu's meaning was quite obvious. While it wasn't at the extent of declaring all-out war against us, the moment Gricasio appeared, there would be a major attack targeting him. And, in order to deal with a myth-ranked immemorial bone dragon like Gricasio, the Tark Republic undead had likely prepared themselves for paying a huge price. "You won't be able to achieve your desire here. HMPH, Your Majesty should not underestimate our determination to take revenge for Emperor Oso." However, I rudely interrupted him halfway through his little speech. After all, no matter what he said or how movingly they swore revenge, it was all meaningless. "Your declaration to kill him for certain has already failed. It's not that I want to protect him, it's because he's not even in the Forest of Dreams." Alright then, Halu's handsome face instantly distorted upon hearing this. I felt that it was something quite new, seeing an undead astonished to the point where his chin bone fell off. "How is that possible? He's not under your protection? Where could he even go?" No, you see, on that day he directly returned to Zayuo and even left a note for me. His note said, "Your Majesty, I'm suddenly having some stomach problems, so please allow me to first return to the Zayuo Empire to await your good news." Ha! As if an undead would actually have a stomach ache? Halu the 12th. "I, too, want to kill off that sly old fox even more than you guys do. As long as you can catch him, feel free to do whatever you like with him without caring about me." How would a sly old fox like Gricasio possibly not know that the Tark Republic wouldn't forgive him? And how could he possibly leave the matter of his own safety up to me? On the same day Oso had sacrificed himself, Gricasio had unhesitatingly left that note for me and left. In order to avoid being caught, A myth-ranked undead Lord Bone Dragon like him actually secretly swam underwater in the middle of the night in order to escape. It was incredibly shameless to the point of having no limits whatsoever. As for whether or not he really returned to the Zuyuo Empire, I figured that it was highly likely he had returned. After all, it was probably the safest place for him. A powerful faction would be the most beneficial for him, and he indeed counted as being part of my faction now. Of course, just like how things were in the past, he was one of my most untrustworthy subordinates, a complete summer soldier and sunshine patriot. 1. A perfect example of when the going gets tough, the tough get going. 2. 1. So, he escaped long ago, and everything you just said was meaningless. Alright then. At least it was fun to see Halu's ugly expression as he left. Although I didn't really know what to think of this entire diplomatic mission, in a way, now that the Tark Republic diplomatic envoy had left, that set the tone for the relationship between us. At the very least, we would definitely remain enemies with the Tark Republic for quite some time to come. After I watched Halu the 12th vanish from my sight, I received an unexpected group of visitors. They want to make use of our strength to protect them? The Veggie Merchant Association's group was still in Nitrain City. Due to our influence as well as the change in the overall situation, the Nitrain City Dragon Knights didn't give them a hard time. Still, staying in an enemy country like this was an uncomfortable situation, which was why they asked to see if they could leave together with us through the Dragon Knights. I hesitated for only a moment before I agreed. After all, this was nothing to us, and, perhaps, the Veggie Merchant Association and those two mercenary groups would come in useful in the future. Besides, the work here at the Forest of Dreams was falling into place. It was almost at the point where I wasn't needed here anymore. It was about time for me to leave. Notes: 1. Ed/N. The terms Summer Soldier and Sunshine Patriot were used in the American Crisis, a series of articles, pamphlets written by Thomas Paine during the uncertain times of the American Revolution, winter 1776. They refer to individuals who claim to fight against tyranny on the side of freedom, yet are unable to stick it out when the going gets tough or unfavorable. Source: Urban Dictionary. 2. Ed/N. The original meaning of this saying is inspirational. When the situation becomes difficult, the strong will work harder to meet the challenge. They become determined and are willing to fight. Oftentimes it is used sarcastically, as it is used here, meaning when the going gets tough, when the situation becomes difficult, the tough get going, the tough people get going, i.e. they flee. Chapter 295, Unfamiliar Old Acquaintance. The Bardi Empire wouldn't deserve to be called a mega empire if they knew nothing about the fact that a major conflict had erupted within their own borders. Everything that had happened at Port Victoria had already been learned by the Bardi Empire's capital city, Staller, through various information channels. After being incited by certain parties, even the commoners were discussing this sudden battle out on the streets. It wasn't limited to the nobles. The current hottest topic was about how the undead planes had been connected to Port Victoria and that the undead armies had arrived. The topic became even hotter when one of the elders of the House of Nobles, in utter disbelief, demanded evidence from the Dragon Knight Archduke Halant. This had enraged Halant to the point where he bloodied that noble's mouth with a powerful before stuffing a memory crystal with the battle's recordings into that very noble's mouth. Alright then. Although Halant would have to pay a price, most likely the Emperor's rage and house arrest for half a year, that unfortunate noble Marquis who had been pitifully beaten up was even arrogant enough to openly swear revenge upon Halant. And so, that noble's luxurious mansion was set on fire by a passing dragon. Yep, we all know what that was really about. Look, it's those undead. Halant's memory crystal, which contained vivid scene of endless amounts of undead pouring in, was viewed time and again by all the highest level members of the Bardi Empire. Descriptions of what was in it spread everywhere. The prevailing attitude in the Bardi Empire began changing as well, and the high-level undead in the royal capital started having a difficult time. The biggest trouble for the undead in the capital was due to the series of events set in motion by Emperor Osso's death. In order to better control the situation, most of the high-level undead in the capital were Osso's direct subordinates who had signed soul contracts where they would die together with their master. When Emperor Osso died, The undead that suddenly died with him astonished the fortunate survivors and made them tremble in fear. After all, in their minds, undead emperors were just like true gods. They were considered undying, immortal existences. To them, it was as if the very sky had fallen. Since the desecration plane was the first undead plane to have connected to the mortal plane, most of the undead that had arrived were from it. It was as if a huge company's CEO had died out of the blue along with many of the higher-ups. The panicking of the mid-level and lower-level employees as a result was only natural. At this critical moment, the living's sudden increase in hostility towards the undead made the undead feel all the more lost for what to do. They became extra cautious in every little action they took as they were afraid of further increasing the enmity towards them. Meanwhile, the most incomprehensible of all was what the master of this country, Orlos XIII, was thinking. While he angrily condemned Halen's ridiculous actions and didn't accept Halen's request to meet him on the surface, he didn't even give Helen any punishment apart from verbal denunciation. Orlos kept coaxing the undead with platitudes but didn't take any actual actions to control the rumors spreading around. His attitude was forceful as always, yet his actions were self-contradictory. While the capital was busy with the chaos of the storm of rumors, Orlos would either shut himself in like a hermit or suddenly desire to go out for some fun and go hunting. His retainers didn't understand just what their venerated emperor was thinking at all. Currently, a sudden rainstorm ambushed Orlos's procession where a battle suddenly began and ended in just an instant. Speak. Who sent you here to assassinate His Majesty Emperor Orlos? The 26th prince? The 8th prince? The assassin's limbs had been sliced off, and the amount of blood on the ground had far surpassed the lethal amount. He was likely to die at any moment. However, the Emperor's personal guard continued his interrogation without skipping a beat. It was the 8th prince. Don't kill me, don't kill me. I've already told you who it was, please help me stop the bleeding. Since the guard received an answer, he ignored the assassin's pleas for help and directly reported it to Emperor Orlos, while also inquiring if they should keep this only assassin that survived out of the group that had ambushed them alive. However, Orlos slowly shook his head, telling his guard to simply execute the assassin. You're not going to ask more? Maybe the assassin wasn't telling the truth. In Orlos's carriage was Helen, who should have been at his home, having been refused a meeting with the emperor. There was one other person riding in Orlos's carriage. The third and final person was a black-robed mage who always followed Emperor Orlos wherever he went. Yet, at the moment, this mage seemed to be napping. Helen wasn't at all surprised by the surprise invitation and the ambush attempt on Orlos. After all, if Orlos XIII didn't have some actual power backing him up, this fox-scorpion emperor would have long been assassinated. It's meaningless. I meet with assassination attempts once or twice every week. Those who dare to try assassinating me, no, I should say that those who come to their deaths here are those who don't care about their lives. Since the assassin said that Little Eighth was behind this, that means that apart from Little Eighth, anyone else could be responsible. No, actually, from the recent reports I've been receiving, they've all made plenty of progress and have learned how to hide the truth within falsehood and make the truth seem like a lie, so maybe Little Eighth isn't so innocent after all. Yep, judging from how Little Eighth's personality has become more and more extreme as of late, there's over a 70% chance that his assassin was just acting there in order to pin the blame on one of his brothers. Little Eighth has become a lot smarter recently. Even though he was clearly talking about something as unfortunate as the fact that his adopted princess wanted to kill him, the old emperor was smiling in such a genial fashion. He even sounded proud of the princess. It was as if he was an elder praising his children for being capable and filial. From a certain standpoint, he was indeed quite proud. The fact that his 20ish adopted princes kept plotting and scheming against each other was actually something that this seemingly kind old man personally put them up to. It appeared that he was intending on using such a method to choose his successor. Halen didn't reply to this as he didn't intend to care about anything in the royal palace, and nor did he have any interest. He was simply interested in why the emperor suddenly invited him over in secret. But whenever he mentioned what was currently happening with the undead in the west part of the Bardi Empire, the old emperor would only mysteriously smile and say, "You'll find out soon in a bit." Actually, due to certain reasons, Emperor Orlos was in quite an excellent mood these days. He sunk into nostalgia as he looked at the rain outside his carriage window. About 30 years ago, on a rainy night just like today's, there was also yet another internal struggle within the royal palace that had left him seriously injured, on the verge of death. At that time, he managed to meet Aso and told Aso about his unwillingness to die, which managed to change his fate. From that day onwards, the Orlos who wasn't so respected and feared in the past possessed the secret power he received from the shadows as he gradually reached the peak of imperial authority. By today, his achievements and authority had far surpassed any Bardi emperor in history. However, only he himself knew that he had to pay a price for that assistance he received in the past. And this debtor wouldn't be easy to deal with. Of course, how would an ambitious and scheming individual like Orlos, who was capable of making his own adopted sons plot against and kill each other to determine the strongest, possibly stand for being controlled by someone else? Orlos always had his own plans and powerful weapons available to him, unbeknownst to all. Even with his numerous and careful preparations, he hadn't put any of them to use yet when the situation majorly changed. The undead's greatest miscalculation was that they didn't expect the stubborn Aso to sacrifice himself. The hold that Aso had over Orlos when Aso intentionally saved Orlos's life naturally disappeared together with Aso's death. The undead's original strategy was to control the old emperor and gradually insert the high-level undead into the various social classes of the Bardi Empire to slowly take over the country from the inside. But now that Aso was dead, and all 6 undead planes' dimensional doors had been opened wide, the situation has become completely chaotic. Nobody responded to Orlos's sentiment. Indeed, with the changes in the situation, some people went from chess pieces to becoming chess players, while some believed themselves to be chess players when they were nothing but sacrificial chess pieces. With all the chain reactions from Aso's death, it was very likely that nobody knew what would happen from now on. Your Majesty, about Port Victoria. My dear Hayland, there's no need to be hasty. When we arrive at a certain place, I'll introduce you to a certain someone. After you talk with her, you'll probably have a fresh outlook on many things. The Emperor retained his smile as he spoke to Hayland. Meanwhile, the horse-drawn carriage entered a forest, and everything in the carriage fell silent as the carriage then proceeded into a deep canyon. Suddenly, a strange sensation of dizziness came over Hayland. He paused in surprise for a moment, but then came to the realization that he had just experienced a dimensional teleportation. Little Orlos, there seems to be a guest today? Orlos heaved a sigh of relief when he heard this voice. He even muttered to himself, I'm quite lucky today. It's the easiest one to talk to this time. Before he responded, yes, he's Abu's grandson and Mina's great-grandson. You've probably seen him before as well. There's a bit of a change in the situation now, so I believe that it's time for him to meet you. A change in the situation? Are you referring to Aso's death or the successful opening of all 6-dimensional doors for the undead planes? Even in this location, I'm quite clear about what happened. Both, but not only that. The darkness around the carriage subsided, and Hayland inhaled deeply when he finally saw just who was speaking. There were stone walls all around, and this seemed to be an underground location. Meanwhile, the soft-sounding female voice belonged to a silver dragon, whose head was as large as a small mountain. Such pure draconic might? Is this an ancient dragon? An immemorial dragon? Or something even more ridiculous, a survivor from the times of fairy tales and legends? Dragons especially viewed both rank and power level as important. Hayland was pressured to the point of being unable to even move in front of this dragon that was evidently far, far stronger than he was. Lady Cherry, even if you're able to sense the incidents that happened in the mortal plane outside, you'll never guess who the person behind all of it was. However, the gigantic dragon seemed to half smile, as if she was an adult who was dealing with a naughty child playing a joke on her. Who else could it be apart from Roland? That special letter I had sent him had been activated, so how could I possibly not know? The silver dragon head seemed to have abnormally human-like behaviors as it revealed a nostalgic expression, seeming to reminisce about something in the past. Then, it revealed a playful expression. Your timing was perfect. The other 2 heads had a huge uproar over hearing about Roland, but they are now asleep. Ha ha, that's wonderful. Right, Hayland met him recently as well. Lady Cherry can ask Hayland about him. The silver dragon sent Hayland a friendly look, and he noticed that the draconic might around him had dissipated. However, before he could even speak up, an astonishingly loud angry roar came from behind him. "Roland! Where's Roland? Don't you dare move! Roland, let me kill you!" Roland's name seemed to have awakened a certain existence which let out a deafening roar. An extremely corrosive green dragon breath melted the entire stone wall. Boom! A colossal dark shadow crashed into the stone wall, and the entire cave shook with the strength of an earthquake that sent endless amounts of small stone shards falling down from the ceiling. While the humans covered their heads and ran, the gigantic black dragon head suddenly reached out, searched around with its huge eyes, but didn't find that man who she hated so much, so she retreated and went back to sleep with loud snores. Only now was Hayland able to completely see the true form of the huge dragon before him. It was an exquisitely beautiful beast, an existence with power that far surpassed any regular immemorial dragon. A three-headed dragon. And they're actually three different species: silver dragon, black dragon, and sapphire dragon. A dragon of good, evil, and neutral are all combined in one body. Dear dragon gods, how is this possible? This is desecration. This is the evilest curse. Arlodant, the mage country, wasn't particularly large in size for a mega empire. Most of its population was concentrated in the capital of magic, Arlo. But, as a mega empire level country, the mage country's size still exceeded East Mist's by several tens of times. Alright then, I'll admit it. It was mostly because East Mist was simply too small. After all, the way most humans saw it was that the entire Northlands were an unimportant remote location, and few paid attention to it. Some were only hearing about the Northland's war with the Beastmen just recently. I never thought that I'd be returning here. It seems like things haven't changed much. Arlo's streets were incredibly clean. Stone gargoyles swept up trash on the streets, and even though it wasn't even nighttime yet, the streets were lit up by magical lights. The street side shops even had magical signs that flashed and sparkled to attract customers with their advertisements. The citizens walking around seemed to be unaffected by the war with the Bardi empires. They casually went about their daily lives. Thanks to the Archmage's excellent mastery of teleportation magic, the business district here was quite renowned. Not only could one see various countries' local specialties here, but it was even possible to find rare treasures and mystical beasts from other dimensions for sale. After all, mages had spread out so far and wide that they even lived in other dimensions. The people here were used to seeing all sorts of strange and exotic things. When a Ivy League airship descended in this city, very few people actually exclaimed over it. The residents only glanced at the gigantic shadow in the air and muttered, "What exotic object have the mages created today?" before busying themselves with their work. But, today, they were destined to be astonished because I, Roland Mist, had returned. Chapter 296, Seekers of Truth. Although it had been 2 days since I and the Wood Spirits envoy group had arrived in the city of Arlo, the highest level authority in the Mage Country, the Truth Symposium, still hadn't contacted us for an official discussion. This wasn't because they were acting high or mighty or because they were avoiding us on purpose. We simply had bad timing, as the Truth Symposium was currently but an empty shell. Where are all the Truth Overseers? Normally speaking, it's already considered quite an accomplishment if more than half of the Truth Overseers can be located. Currently, there are only 6 Truth Overseers on duty at Cloud Tower. It's impossible to begin a conference with only that many. At the very least, there needs to be 10 of them. How about just waiting for the Truth Symposium's regular scheduled meeting for next month? Aluso, a member of the Mystic Guild Blade School, was one of the most famous ice mages of the current generation. Halfway through the semi-god rank, he was a former member of the Truth Symposium. When we arrived, he was the one who came to greet us and had answered my question. Judging by his unrestrained passion and how hard he hugged me as a greeting, the Icean spell I had given to him as a gift must have been something he really liked. It likely brought him great benefits. Roland, I never expected that we would meet each other again. You, the king of all truants, would actually mature to such a degree? As the dean, I'm quite proud of you. This old archmage had a rather plump physique which was quite rare for mages. Aluso also had an excellent reputation for being one of the nicest mages in Cloud Tower. He was currently smiling like a Maitreya, one, and even slapped his own plump stomach as he laughed, causing his fat to tremble. We sort of counted as teacher and student as well. Back when Cade and I were studying beginner level magic, we were all technically under Aluso in the Mystical Blade as he was the head teacher at the time. Now, he had become the dean of the Mystical Blade School, which was why the graduation certificate he did for me even had his personal seal and signature. Although we were technically teacher and student, it wasn't like what I had with Harlois or Amelia. In order to explain things clearly, I first need to explain the Mage Country's special and unique political structure. This country, rather than calling it an independent country, which would typically be considered to have a group of people ruling over others, would be much more accurately described as a mega-large research association. The capital Arlo's name meant Seekers of Truth in the ancient language, and it represented the intention of this city when it was founded. Similarly, Arlodant meant the place where Seekers of Truth gather in the ancient language, which was quite self-explanatory. The ruling class in this country wasn't composed of a noble system. So-called nobles were simply local administrators to begin with. And, even though this was the mage country, true authority didn't lay in the hands of any single mage. The entire mage country consisted of countless small, medium, and large mage organizations. Every mage would typically choose to join the most appropriate mage organization for them, as the most effective way to get one's voice heard in the mage country was through an organization. The larger organizations would tend to have various smaller factions or internal organizations and branch organizations. This was due to the fact that mages would have different understandings and paths on how to seek the truth. I want to prove Star Cluster Magic's revelations on fate. An example of one organization came about because of Archmage Rodriguez's ideas about star magic. Thus, the famous Star Revelation Mage organization came into existence. This organization's divination, prophecy, and horoscope magic was at the world's peak. However, the Star Revelation's members were typically utter hermits who lacked practical combat experience. It would be considered quite something if their members could perform at even half their actual power ranks. I want to reach the pinnacle of combat magic. Another example of how an organization came about was because of Archmage Levist's passion in combat magic. Thus, the famous Mystical Blade came into existence. Their members were typically far more experienced in actual combat, which was rare for mages. They were far more skilled at combat magic and combat strategies, and half of the classes they taught were about practical combat. They typically grew through actual battles. However, it would be difficult to ask any of them for some top-level theories. Alright then, although both of these organizations were among the most powerful organizations in the mage country, they were almost exact opposites and had a terrible relationship with each other. One could view them as a practical faction and a theoretical faction, or one could even think of it as the hard sciences versus the literary arts. But there were no absolutes, as there were always exceptions to everything. The great Saint Margaret was a member of a smaller faction within Star Revelation. However, she was definitely highly skilled in real combat, having traveled all over the world. And, from a certain standpoint, I counted as a member of the Mystical Blade. But let's not mention elemental magic, which frustrated me so much. At the very least, I was quite well versed in undead magic. From another standpoint, the organization's goal would typically change over time, different from what the creator intended. An example would be the Sword of Order organization. This organization's creator was a fervent believer in the Holy Light, and the organization's original focus was on Order Divine Arts, the power of faith and belief, Holy Light magic, and other similar topics. But, in the current generation, the changes in the Sword of Order organization were so massive that the original founder would likely be angered to death if he was still alive. Perhaps they had gone off the wrong track somewhere, somehow, or maybe it was that things would always eventually balance in the opposite direction. This organization had long since stopped studying Holy Light magic and instead specialized in the rarest and strangest forms of magic. For example, their member mages liked to study undead magic, demon summoning magic, Eastern talismans, and so on. It was definitely a gathering of researchers who loved to study the unpopular, and the Sword of Order organization ranked at the top of the world in studying the various sorts of taboo magic. The relationships between the various organizations were quite messy. Some of the smaller organizations counted themselves as part of several larger organizations since their core leaders were members of those large organizations. However, the large organizations all had bad relationships with one another, so during every academic conference, the mages wouldn't know who to support. Don't look down on academic conferences, as they were the most serious conferences in the mage country. The moment various organizations started disagreeing about something, the conference room would immediately turn into a dueling arena. Yep, the most important meetings in the mage country were academic conferences, rather than supposedly serious political meetings. Since all the mage organizations sought the truth as their goal, their internal conflicts stemmed from various types of academic disagreements. And, in the mage country, the highest level academic conference was the Truth Symposium. Yep, the same Truth Symposium was also the highest level authority of this country. The members of this Truth Symposium weren't fixed. Archmages with great research accomplishments or excellent reputations would be invited to become members, thus receiving the non-governmental status of Truth Overseer. However, many undying archmages were uninterested in the Truth Symposium, which was hardly ever able to come to a unified agreement on any topic. After forcing themselves to participate in a few meetings, they would feel like it wasn't worth the trouble of having the title of Truth Overseer. They would often resign from their posts, and new archmages would take their place. The reason? The Truth Symposium had two types of meetings: scheduled meetings and emergency meetings. Any mage that reached a sufficient level could apply to listen into a Truth Symposium meeting and support their own faction. When I was still an acolyte, I had listened into two Truth Symposium meetings. I discovered that at these meetings, the mages would use 30% of the time to brag about their own academic results, 50% of the time to attack others' newest research accomplishments or to plagiarize them, and the remaining 20% of meeting time would be used to fight over funding and resources. For instance, they would always fight over the new mages with the greatest potential. As for political tasks that needed to be done, when all the mages' mouths were dry and they finally became tired of arguing, the final 5 minutes of the meeting would be used to pass new political policies at a high speed. The efficiency was incredible. Before a policy was even fully read out loud, all the mages would raise their hands in approval, and before the documents were finished being signed, all the mages would teleport away. With such politicians in charge, it must have been hard on the actual governmental administrators. It's all just a joke. They're also old and stubborn. They're all top-level experts in their own fields, so who'd be able to convince anyone by simply debating? There's also an ironclad rule that disallows actual fighting at the Truth Symposium. By the end of the debates, it's not even about who's being logical and reasonable, it's about who can be the loudest and maintain their concentration for the longest. It's about who can tolerate such a farcical debate the longest. This was also why the mage country had never invaded another country in the past thousands of years. In the past, there were obviously mages with plenty of ambitions. But to convince enough archmages in the Truth Symposium to pass a majority decision to declare war would be as difficult as reaching the stars. That mage might as well rely on their personal strength to try and conquering that country to realize their ambitions. The mage country could technically even be considered to not be a country. For the true, purest of mages, the only places in the world they cared about were their research laboratories and libraries. They lacked territorial ambition and they did not pursue glory and honor, the exact opposite of the nobles and royalty in this world. With such a political system, it was impossible for the Truth Symposium to ever find the truth about anything. Instead, it was quite easy for one to make enemies. It was quite common for those who became truly angry after arguing with those that disagreed with them to call for a duel with the other side in Mid-Mountain Park after the conference. After all, fighting was strictly prohibited during the conference itself. Every time one passed by that flowery park, one could always witness various duels of all sorts, sometimes even those involving forbidden spells. It was quite common to see an elderly white-haired professor dueling against some slightly cultured hooligan mage. There were even plenty of mages that knew martial arts and would use such techniques in the duels. It was difficult for any sane person to tolerate such long and meaningless meetings for more than 1 or 2 times. And, For the smaller organizations and independent non-affiliated mages, their research results would be questioned endlessly, which made things all the more unpleasant. That was why, due to a lack of enough truth overseers to hold the meetings, the conferences were postponed endlessly. However, since the meetings were considered pointless by everyone in the first place as nothing ever came of them, everyone was actually quite happy to postpone them. Yet there was an ironclad rule that the leaders of the 18 largest and strongest mage organizations were absolutely required to attend all the scheduled Truth Symposium meetings. Their organizations were too influential, so they were forced to attend. And, in a way, this actually caused the leadership of these large and powerful organizations to change quite rapidly, as if it was an unpleasant job that nobody wanted. Of course, there were exceptions to everything. For example, a certain witch intentionally became a truth overseer of her own volition. Although her main goals were to scam research funds and cover her own crimes, her excellent physical appearance and ability to conceal what she was really like, along with that natural talent of hers to detect others' emotions, helped her greatly in taking lead on discussing several major topics. She even won most of her debates, accumulating very high popularity and authority within both the Cloud Tower and the Mystical Blade. Yep, the witch Amelia had once been a member of the Mystical Blade as well. She even gave classes to me and Cade back in the day. Right now, my biggest headache was that I was going to have to attend this headache-inducing Truth Symposium meeting. Not long ago, I met with a Truth Overseer named Oslawan, and my system directly gave me the next step in my epic quest. Congratulations for activating the next part of your epic quest. Will you have a glorious homecoming, or will you become a fallen phoenix? You are required to participate in the next Truth Symposium meeting. The next portion of your quest will depend on how you do at the Truth Symposium meeting and the status and identity with which you decide to attend. System reminder: you know how things are done between mages. If you want mages to listen to you, you have to bring out something worthy of their attention. From this long quest, which was, in actuality, a series of quests in succession, it was quite obvious what the final goal of this epic quest was now. Of course, I would need to directly or indirectly get involved in this three-way war. That was how all these quests in this epic quest chain were connected. First, I had to choose a side in this war and improve my reputation level in the chosen side. After making my choice, what came next would naturally be to increase my influence. Only if people listened to me would I have the power to influence the entire war's situation. For me and my newly born Mist Alliance, allies were absolutely required. I needed to try and get a mega empire level country on my side, as they were the most influential voices in human society. The mage country was an anomaly to begin with amongst all the mega empire countries. Since there were problems with all the other mega empire countries, the mage country was probably the most trustworthy ally I could choose from the rest. Their support would be immensely important. Based on my system's typical habit of making me suffer, I knew that unless I had a sufficient enough status to speak at the Truth Symposium and made myself influential enough at the meeting, the future developments would only make me suffer more and more. Perhaps I would even become nothing more than a cannon fodder level vanguard without realizing it. If the next scheduled conference was postponed, that would be both good and bad for me. The bad would be that I wouldn't be able to continue the quest for quite a while the good would be that I would have more time to prepare. However, that conference would be about the critically important issue of the war against the Bardi Empire. The invitations had already been sent out to the Truth Overseers, and absenteeism was strictly forbidden. It was highly unlikely that it would be postponed as usual, so my current goal was to make myself as influential and reputed as possible within the time limit of 1 month. I wanted to influence things at the conference as much as possible. With so many things having happened recently, the Truth Symposium meeting will definitely be held. At the very most, it'll only be postponed by 1 or 2 months. Roland, wait around for a while and familiarize yourself with the environment here. The situation seems to be easing up on the front lines, and 2 Truth Overseers should be returning soon. At that time, they can begin the procedures for the meeting. Right, how about coming to my school to teach a few classes as a way of passing time? With a veteran student returning to the school to teach, the students should be quite pleased. Only now did I recall that Aluso had helped me obtain a special teaching certificate. At the time, I was just thinking that he was helping me to have an identity as a member of the mage country. I didn't realize that he was actually serious about having me teach. After all, from a certain standpoint, we were all students from his school. Of course, students from a magic school were completely different from a mage's disciples. Most large and medium-sized mage organizations had their own magic schools. That was where novices would be trained and talent and hard work could show their mettle. Of course, the mage organizations wouldn't do such things like run magic schools for novices out of kindness and charity. Due to the magic schools always being affiliated with some mage organization, the newbies at the magic school would typically become the fresh blood for joining these organizations. Of course, if the newbies wanted to become official members, they would either need to perform incredibly well or become a candidate for an archmage's disciple. The general knowledge taught at magic school may be shallow and limited, but it was also the most efficient required knowledge. So many years of teaching magic pared the classes down to the essentials, and it would build a solid foundation that would help a novice reach the next step. Seeds with true potential would be able to sprout with just this little amount of nutrition. Most archmages would find students appropriate for them while teaching classes, such as Harlois and Amelia back in the day. By the way, since Harlois and Amelia were both teachers at the Mystical Blade Magic School, they were naturally both members of the Mystical Blade Mage organization as well. And, to my knowledge, Harlois was also one of the top-level members of the Sword of Order. While she was still a teacher, she discovered quite a few vicious individuals that she recruited into the Sword of Order, and several of her disciples even ended up on the Calamity rankings. There were even more that became antisocial maniacs. Harlois' nickname of being the Demon Professor was definitely well-deserved. In all honesty, it was just far too difficult to become a mage, so mage society didn't have the typical human society's system of children taking over their parents' work. Not only that, a mage's typical inheritance that they left behind would mostly be research about a particular topic and records about seeking the truth. The most important part of mage society naturally became the relationship between teacher and student. I definitely can't have my teacher's knowledge be lost to the world with my generation. This way of thinking was common to every mage. When a mage reached a certain level, they would desire to find a student who could inherit all their knowledge and research. Of course, the most important inheritance of all would always be the mage's desire to learn more about a particular topic. And unlike other jobs where sometimes the relationship between teacher and student would be icy, the relationship between mage teachers and mage students would typically go on for several tens of years or even several centuries. It would typically become one akin to that between a parent and child. In fact, the mage country's laws even stated that a mage teacher had the right to make arrangements for a disciple's life, while the disciples would be responsible for taking care of an elderly teacher in old age. There were also inheritance laws for teachers and students that mirrored other countries' inheritance laws between parents and children. What? Me and Harlois? A mage teacher-student relationship like ours, as if we were mortal enemies cursed forever to be stuck with each other. There would never be anyone else like us in existence. Although I was currently worried about how to increase my fame, I soon started worrying about if I was becoming far too famous. It was a huge mistake to take those bastards with me. Note: 1. Ed/N. Maitreya is regarded as the future Buddha of this world in Buddhist eschatology. The Buddha'i, or Laughing Buddha, is often identified with or seen as an incarnation of Maitreya, so much so that the Buddha'i image is one of the main forms in which Maitreya is depicted in China. In this case, the author was relating the Luso to the chubby, smiling image of Buddha'i. Source: PDG Chapter 345 TL Note. Yes, I know. I was recently reading PDG, and it seriously was a coincidence. I'm definitely not stalking other novels' notes. Definitely not. Chapter 297, The Great Industrial Party. I should just toss these bastards into gnome cannons and have them shot to the ends of the world. No, that's still not enough. Their ability to survive surpasses even cockroaches. Even if I toss them into the trench of Emu, they'll surely still survive and return. Sir? I knew I should have tied them you all up and tossed them into the sea. No, that still wouldn't be safe enough. I should just send them into my frigid winter earth and have them hibernate there forever, sir. An angry roar right next to me finally snapped me back to my senses. The next moment, A female face appeared in front of me and almost scared me witless. "Sir, although you're an archmage from Mystical Blade, as well as our teacher, the most basic laws of our society need to be followed. Please take the law seriously." Alright then, looking at the young and angry woman before me, even though we were both wearing the light blue robes of Mystical Blade, her emblem on her sleeve, which represented she was responsible for maintaining social order, stood out incredibly so. As I was the person bailing out the criminals, I could only obediently apologize and make promises on those bastards' behalf. "I'm so sorry. I shall properly lecture them. I definitely won't give them an opportunity to commit such crimes again." In the mage country, those who broke the law would naturally be punished by the mages. Since the Mystical Blade consisted of mages skilled in practical combat, many of their members chose to join law enforcement and social order jobs in society. Although this woman before me seemed young, she had already been working at her job for more than 10 years judging by the emblem on her chest. And, as was common of a member of the powerful Mystical Blade, she was the type who really liked to lecture others. "Sir, please make absolutely certain to rein them in. I can barely even believe that someone would do such a thing." Her lecture was getting longer and was giving me a headache. However, I felt just like an unlucky parent summoned to a parent-teacher meeting because my child hadn't received a passing grade, as I could only smile and apologize continuously as I accepted the endless lecturing. Yep, I'll definitely put a tighter leash on them." I finally managed to finish the process of bailing them out. Right when we left the mage country's version of a police station together, all the bastards behind me started jumping up and down in excitement at having regained their freedom. "Eaglestorm, my lord, relax. In the future, when I'm spreading the teachings of my Wild Bull Alliance, I'll definitely remember to wear some pants." "Does that mean you won't be wearing a shirt?" "Alright then, let's stop caring about that sly old fox." The very first day he arrived, Eaglestorm started spreading his Wild Bull Alliance's teachings. It was only to be expected that he would be captured and arrested by a mage in charge of maintaining social order, and it was only a matter of time before he was jailed again. If it had been only him, I wouldn't have even bothered coming here to bail him out. However, Jan, you've greatly disappointed me. A town security officer like you, an enforcer of the law, was jailed as well? This isn't Sulphur Mountain City or Definder. Don't make trouble for me. My lord, I'm so sorry. I really didn't think that those hooligans would be so weak against my beating. Still, they were such cowards. Although they were breaking the law themselves, they actually requested assistance from a law enforcer. So would they be brave if they let you beat them up as you pleased? Stop reading strange books and start thinking with your brain instead of your muscles. After all, a successful town security officer needs to have some intelligence. Next, I glanced over at the youngest criminal amongst the bunch. "Little time lad. I apologize, Big Brother Roland. I'll be more careful in the future. Next time, I won't let them find any evidence and I won't personally go to pick up the goods. I'll find an adult to do the work on my behalf when I need black market merchants." Alright then, what he was actually saying was that he still intended to continue and that the only mistake he made was letting others find evidence of his crime. Little Time Lad was the most excited person out of all of us to arrive at the Cloud Tower. He was quite curious about all the magical secrets available here. In just a few days, he already spent every last cent of the money he had saved up over the past few years on all sorts of various strange things. He had been arrested for going to the black market to purchase stolen goods. It really wasn't my fault. How would I know that the mage was idiotic enough to test the barbecue rack right after I sold it to him? Hey, he was unlucky to be caught in such an explosion. This old and young engineer pair. Sigh. One sold fake products and injured someone else, while the other went to the black market to purchase stolen products and ended up getting reported because he looked too young. While there was, indeed, a saying that birds of a feather flock together, the two of them stuck together due to their bad habits and kept negatively influencing each other. As time passed, they were becoming worse and more dangerous. What? I'm still missing one person? It would seem incredibly improbable that a certain individual whose name had become forbidden would actually manage to escape being jailed here, right? Ha! Are you talking about a certain individual currently under suspicion of magical pit kidnapping and desecrating a summoned creature? At the moment, a certain Draken was still in a jail cell and was trying his utmost to attract my attention by rapidly blinking. I don't know who that is. I didn't see anything, and none of you saw anything either, right? As I expected. Everyone shook their heads. Nobody knew who this individual could possibly be. Yep, I didn't know him one bit, so of course I didn't intend to bail him out. I definitely didn't want to become known as a pervert through association, so that bastard may as well obediently stay in jail until he rots. And it wasn't only me. All the other criminals I bailed out were in mutual accord and managed to forget about that person. After all, not a single one of them wanted to be treated as that person's companion. He had managed to become headline news on his very first day here, making it beyond difficult for any of them to dare to claim to know who he was. I'm not going to care about all of your private affairs. But what about the tasks I gave you all to do? How are they going? The reason I took them along with me wasn't to give myself more trouble. In fact, it was the opposite. I would need many helpers for what I was planning, and most of the things could only be accomplished by them. With you personally signing the forms and Archmage Kate's letter of recommendation, the registration process has been completed. The newly born mage organization Great Industrial Party has been successfully established. It shall be registered as an organization under the Mystical Blade, and you are listed as the Great Industrial Party's leader. Since you and Cade, two top-level archmages, are backing this organization up, nobody should be stupid enough to come looking for trouble. As a great alchemist, Jinyabar was quite popular in the mage country. That was why I sent him to run some errands and do some paperwork for me. And it was probably the only reason why he wasn't also locked up for selling fake products. What about the store? Have the renovations started? There's been a tiny little problem with that. But have trust in old Jinya, it'll soon be taken care of. Jinya's gnome eyes were darting left and right at a quick pace. Based on my understanding of him, he was obviously lying to me. Yep, we'll probably need only 1 week to clear away all the rubble. Then, we can begin on the renovation work for the new shop. Time Lad smiled and immediately sold Ginyan out. Rebel? You damned gnome, you caused an explosion again? Ah, I knew I shouldn't have left things up to you all. Amelia will kill me. Jinya's rushed escape was the best evidence that I had been on my mark. It was now my turn to be in a terrible mood. Originally, due to certain reasons, as Amelia's only disciple as well as lover, I successfully managed to take over several properties under Amelia's name on Stone Crystal Street. I intended to use these properties as a base of sorts to do some things here. However, I regretted it immediately on the second day after taking over those properties. Countless debtors swarmed upon me upon seeing that someone had moved into Amelia's properties. All sorts of IOUs and debt agreements piled up with enough money owed to purchase the entire Stone Crystal Street. Not to mention, I had legally taken over her properties using faked documents and my real status as her student, so it was only natural that the debts were taken over by me as well. I think it's far more than just one street. There's probably enough debt to purchase 3 whole streets. Amelia, were you actually out traveling to escape your debts? Fine then, I suppose I owe it to you to pay your debts off. Besides, I'll also benefit from this in the end. From a certain standpoint, it would be quite difficult for a foreign visitor to speedily integrate himself into a relatively closed-off society. However, even if Amelia's reputation was somewhat seedy, people still knew about her, as evidenced by all the debtors waiting for her to resurface. No matter what, her storefront had over 100 years of reputation to back it up. As long as I paid off her debts, I would be able to utilize her connections, which would be far faster than if I tried to establish connections of my own. And, right now, what I lacked the most was time. Amelia's store? The Great Industrial Party? You see, even though I was once again intending on improving my reputation, the devious tricks I pulled off in Kara would be useless for a repeat performance here. In the Mage Country's society, nothing would compare to research achievements and academic accomplishments. This was similar to my previous world's academic society in its theoretical purest form. I'm an elemental magic specialist who won the Martin Scholar Award twice before. I'm the unknown mage who invented the Ician spell. I'm the vice dean of the Kazo Magic School. My disciples are all over the world. Ician, thank you very much. I'm a core member of the Sword of Order. Could you stop talking about that Icon of yours? I'm the creator of Undead Construction. Since you're a member of the Sword of Order, you should have read my thesis collection before on the might of undead construction. Or perhaps you're not even at the level where you're allowed to look at such top secret theses? Let us talk a bit more about Icon. When research results could turn into actual power and wealth, the phrase knowledge is power would no longer be simply an empty platitude. The status of mages was basically determined by their academic accomplishments. As for why this ice mage former teacher of mine treated me so well, that would be because of the magic information I had given him. Not only would it assist his own personal research as a reference, it would also massively increase the status of ice magic within the mystical blade. Us ice mages in the mystical blade finally have a forbidden spell. This sounded rather cool, and it would even help as an advertisement to attract young ice mages into mystical blade. Of course, the truth that 99% of people would be unable to reach the level required to cast this spell would be left unsaid. This wasn't even an attempt to fool people. It was simply common sense that didn't need to be said. After all, forbidden spells were far too difficult. And besides, even if it was left unused, it would still benefit many ice mages as they researched and analyzed the components of the forbidden spell. Of course, I didn't do it for nothing. There was a rule of equivalent exchange in mage society, and since I provided such a rare and precious magical spell to the mystical blade, they rewarded me with an astronomical number of their contribution points that I could exchange for other magical knowledge and secrets. This was the most basic function of any mage organization, to gather a group of mages with similar interests to exchange information and magical ingredients so that everyone involved may benefit and grow stronger together. But if I joined the conference using the status of Roland from the mystical blade, I would immediately face endless challenges from the Eye of Truth and other such mage organizations. It would be much better for me to join the conference as simply myself. The Great Industrial Party would be a theoretical type organization. Amelia's stores and workshops would be how I would turn theories into actual products and money. With that completed, a persistent virtuous cycle would be created, and this new mage organization would truly be established. The goal I had given myself was to be able to appear at the conference with the status of inventor of a new technology. And I, indeed, had plenty of technologies and toys on hand that I could use. No matter if it was magical engineering, the four elemental sword casters, undead magic, ice magic, or wood spirits, there were plenty of things I could bring to the table. Obtaining the mage country's support was something on my to-do list for quite a long time already. It would be quite convenient to show and give them all these things in order to improve my standing here. I already had the technology, and as for stores and workshops, I could make use of Amelia's thorn garden as well. Stone Crystal Street was a rather flourishing and bustling street. But due to the fact that the store had been completely destroyed by Jinya's explosion, I now needed to consider how to reconstruct it. And also how to explain to Amelia just why her garden and experimental laboratory needed to undergo such extensive reconstruction. But, in order to overturn Amelia's past reputation, make the Cloud Tower's various mage organizations take note of my great industrial party and even give me the right to attend the Truth Symposium meeting as the leader of the great industrial party, I would need to show them a sufficient amount of strength and achievements. From a certain standpoint, the little gift of Icon that I gave to the mystical blade helped me out greatly. I could avoid the most troublesome part of accumulating everything from scratch. Teacher, good morning. The weather's quite nice today, isn't it, sir? Hello. Would you happen to have time to eat lunch together with me? Senior, please go ahead of me. As I walked around, there were quite a few that came up to me and politely greeted me. These people included white-bearded elderly mages as well as passionate and beautiful young female mages. The friendly attitudes they had towards me filled the bastards following behind me with nothing but disbelief. Brother Roland, could it be that you were unpopular for so long that you finally couldn't stand it anymore and finally purchased a potion of alluring as seen in the advertisements? But that's obviously just a fake and useless product. Ren was a bit hesitant but finally said what she was thinking out loud. Although the implied meaning behind her words made me quite displeased, making me want to retort, I decided against it when I thought about how she was one of the few people that came with me who I didn't have to bail out of jail. HMPH. This is the charisma of a scholar. Little girls like you wouldn't understand. Alright then, if you ignored all those ridiculous abilities attached to me that I couldn't get rid of, in a way, I actually had quite a high charisma stat. However, it was obviously impossible for me to suddenly become so popular through my charisma stat alone. The true reason was because of the mystical blade robe I was wearing. This was a deep blue mage robe. Although it wasn't really eye-catching, the robe was made of star sand and tiger moth silk, the highest quality materials. Of course, most normal mages wouldn't be able to notice such a tiny detail. What they saw were the emblems on my chest as well as the special color of my robe. The mystical blades mage robes were all light blue. However, deep blue was a color reserved only for mage teachers. Well, that wasn't much on its own. After all, there were countless professors and lecturers within the Cloud Tower to begin with. The most critical part was still the three emblems on my mage robe. The first was an emblem of a blue book that said 443. This represented that I was part of the 443rd batch of students to graduate from the Cloud Tower after the Cloud Tower overhauled and unified the education system several centuries ago, with one batch of students graduating every year. The current new graduates already had emblems numbering over 600. And that young female policewoman mage also had an emblem numbering over 600. That meant that despite how young I appeared, I was a senior to them who had graduated about 200 years before they did or would. The other two emblems I possessed were two very similar crown emblems with wings on the crowns. One was a black crown with bone wings, while the other was a white crown with ice wings. This was the greatest honor in the mage country, the emblem of endless truth. This emblem by itself wasn't that meaningful. It was simply the symbol of one's academic achievements. However, the fact that mine were crowns represented that I had reached the peak of my fields. The black crown with bone wings represented undead magic, while the white one with ice wings represented ice magic. And the only basic requirement for one to be able to join the Truth Symposium was to have one of these tiny crown emblems. However, since knowledge was power to mages, pretty much only myth and semi-god ranked mages would be able to obtain this emblem. This seemingly ordinary mage robe was, in reality, broadcasting my status to everyone. What the mages passing by saw was an old artifact at least 200 years old still pretending to be young, not to mention I was at the peak in two different magic types. It seemed quite likely that I was a truth overseer as well. So of course all the mages would be polite to me. These emblems were also the reason why I was able to so easily bail out those damned bastards from jail. Apart from the emblems I had, there were many more emblems that represented all sorts of achievements and personal status. However, I had no more emblems other than these three. I saw a random mage passing me by who had more than 20 emblems attached to his mage robe, including even 2 dragon slaying emblems, which indicated that he had slain 2 dragons. However, he didn't particularly seem to have a proud expression on his face. Well, it might have been because that it was forbidden to remove or not wear these emblems, so he might have felt that his emblems were attracting too much attention. As for why the mage country made such a law, forcing mages to wear these emblems, that was in order to save everyone's time and prevent fights. After all, there were too many old artifacts here. Perhaps that little girl right in front of you, hopping up and down while waiting in line at the cafeteria, was actually 1,000-plus-year-old elder, and if you cut in line right in front of her, she might casually flick her hand and kill you without breaking a sweat. In the distant past, there were all sorts of mages that loved to pretend to act weak before revealing their true strength, or pretentious mages that loved to act strong but ended up getting slapped in the face, which gave the law enforcing and public order mages far too many headaches. But ever since this law about the emblems was passed in the mage country, a mage only had to take a look at the emblems on another mage's robe to roughly know whether they could take that person on in a fight. This helped drastically reduce the number of conflicts in the mage country. As I walked, I gave the orders for my plans for the upcoming period of time to the bastards following behind me. Soon, we returned to Stone Crystal Street, but what greeted my eyes was a little store that was utterly different to how it was the day before. Chapter 298, New Thorn Garden. Thorn Garden, Amelia's 100-plus-year-old store on Stone Crystal Street, was now unrecognizable to its former self. Now, It was a cute store that was decorated like a small forest. The products were housed in small tree houses, numerous vines and trees were the store's pillars, and green grass constituted the most natural of floorboards. The cute wood spirits worked busily as the hard-working employees, while the tall strengthened outer sheltrians became the store's security guards. Incredibly, this unconventional decorative style had already attracted many customers on its own. "Thank you for your purchase. Please come again." As the cashier, Rosa was very busy, but she made it a point to smile at every customer, who were all, quite evidently, satisfied. The wood spirits were busy as well, dashing around and smiling warmly as they served the customers. From some female mages and acolytes, high-pitched exclamations, "So cute! Let this big sister hug you!" reached my ears. Yesterday, this place was clearly nothing but trouble. Jinya's muttering made me turn around and glare at the bastards I had to bail out of Mage Country's jail. I compared them to the hard-working wood spirits and, once again, seriously considered whether or not I should toss all these bastards into an ocean trench or tie them to a gnome rocket and shoot them into the sky. Why was there such a huge difference between the wood spirits and these bastards? I nodded in satisfaction as I continued observing the wood spirits, but when I entered the store, "Ah, father, you've returned." The moment Rosa greeted me, everyone glanced in my direction. The looks of disbelief and shock from the customers were too awkward for me to handle. "Daddy. Dad, Little Red 232 has worked very hard today. Did you see me? Father, we made a lot of profit today." Full of joy, the wood spirits scampered up to me and hopped up and down as they showed off their accomplishments. Meanwhile, all the customers were looking at me in more and more of an unfriendly fashion. Apart from their somewhat strange plant parts, wood spirits greatly resembled young elves. Since I hadn't yet started spreading news of the existence of this miraculous new species, I was intending to save it for the Truth Symposium conference. Most people would believe that the wood spirits were young female elves who simply preferred to dress up in nature's style. Some sharply perceptive individuals, however, noticed that they weren't entirely the same as elves. However, that was a bad thing because he's actually making such young daughters of his work. What a scumbag. Take a closer look. Some of these elves don't have sharp ears. They're probably all half-bloods. With so many daughters, the word scumbag isn't even sufficient to describe him anymore. Just how many elves has this bastard fooled? He's such a playboy father. I'm so jealous. They actually have numbers in their names? That means he has at least several hundred daughters? Wow! What a super mega scumbag! Two emblems of endless truth indicating that he's a master of two different types of magic. Even if he's a super powerful archmage, that doesn't change the fact that he's a scumbag. Strange comments such as these could be heard everywhere. My reputation now began developing in this strange direction. And, at such a moment, how would my system possibly forget to add fuel to the fire? I had, once again, activated a reputation quest. Mage Country, Caro City, venerated 20,000, playboy who's finally reformed. Your reputation has now been transferred to Mage Country, Arlo, respected, 168,50,000. The playboy shall never reform. Congratulations. You have obtained the new title, Professional Onishishi. 1. Equipping this title will greatly increase your attractiveness to young girls. The classical line, "Would you like to come with me for some candy?" will have its success rate massively increased. But, at the same time, adult women will be massively repulsed by you. System notification: stop always blaming others for making you suffer. You're the source of all gentlemanly evils. The scandal I had made up in Caro City, with great difficulty, mind you, in order to increase my reputation was no more. My reputation was now distorted even further and was destined to become stranger and stranger. While I was almost wanting to cry at this development, a certain bright and cheery obedient girl spoke up and sprinkled some extra salt on my wounds. "Father, when Mother sees that you've done such a good job running her shop, she'll surely be delighted." Mother? The original owner of the store? Amelia. The moment the customers heard Rosa's innocent comment, I knew everything was over for me. Wah, my angel! The heavens shall smite such a scumbag! Let me go. Don't stop me. I'm going to do everything to kill that scumbag. Nothing will get in the way of my revenge. Who cares if he has two emblems of endless truth? Even if he's a 200-plus-year-old ancient zombie, even if he can casually kill us with his little finger, even if he can make us fail our classes forever at his whim. Hey, why are you letting me go? Be a little more pragmatic. Come back and restrain me. Should I say that it was to be expected of someone who had her own support group even within the Truth Symposium? As a mega popular mage teacher, the angelic Amelia's faked wonderful reputation was far more known to everyone than her true personality. And due to Amelia's overt favoritism for female students, she had both male and female fans. There were now people everywhere spitting blood upon hearing my name, and countless more really wanted to beat me up. How nice that my reputation was increasing once again. And how speechless I was. Even though everyone was cursing me, I could only helplessly look at little Rosa, who was still smiling happily, apparently not realizing what she had just done. You must be black-bellied underneath that pink appearance of yours. Rosa isn't black at all. It's our duty as your daughters to watch you well and make sure you don't get up to no good with other women while mother isn't here. Alright then. That perfectly innocent brilliant smile of hers made me be at a loss at how to punish her for the trouble she had just put me in. After all, she wasn't like the group of bastards behind me, with ridiculously thick skin that could endure anything, including being shot out of a gnome cannon. If I did such a thing to Rosa, my infamous reputation would gain the title of lolly abuser, adding to my list of crimes. So, I could only helplessly shake my head as I picked up this pink little troublemaker who was definitely secretly black-bellied and entered a private room in the store. As for all the cries of Demon Father and Lolicon behind me, I could only pretend to ignore them. As for the way my reputation was turning out, forget it. I didn't have any hopes for my reputation helping me anyways. Even when I was studying here, I didn't manage to get a single girlfriend, so this time was probably the same. And since the result was going to be the same, who cared if my reputation kept getting worse and worse? At least I didn't think I had any regrets. I definitely wasn't disappointed because I couldn't disguise myself as planned in becoming a teacher to flirt with the female students that didn't know anything about me. Nope, definitely not. As for those tears forming in my eyes, that must just be a mistaken impression. Forget it, forget it. That's just my life. It's 99% your fault, it's 100% your fault. Alright then, the system and the silly cat's comments came simultaneously. Should I be thankful that, at least, the system had a better impression of me? Relax. There's no such thing as an absolute, and based on my logical calculations, there's still at least a minuscule chance for you to obtain a girlfriend, although it's a decimal with many zeros. Would you like for me to help calculate it for you? 0.000. No. Stop spreading salt on my wounds. I decided to ignore my system and the silly cat, as I was rather interested in a different topic. Rosa, what are you all selling? The products I'm preparing haven't arrived yet. Are you all doing some type of wood spirit coffee house here or something? Yes. That was what mystified me. I had just finished purchasing a new workshop as Amelia's experimental laboratory was now nothing more than rubble. The magical engineering technological products weren't ready yet, so how did these young wood spirits make the store so popular? Although Mother wasn't skilled at business, the products of her research are excellent, and her emblem of endless truth and plant magic helps her reputation. For those who have needs for her plant products, she's actually considerably popular. It's just that Mother's pricing system and product availability were too unreasonable. Her magical plants have great combat strength and are actually one of her most popular products we've been selling, but Mother actually priced the magical plant seeds at 15,000 gold coins apiece, when they cost her less than 10 gold coins to make. That made the plant seeds into a mega luxury item that few could afford. Of course she would be unable to sell any of them. The reverse is true as well. She priced many items too cheaply, and they always sold out instantly. However, she priced them so low that she barely profited, and Mother was too lazy to restock those products. After hearing all this, I understood. Actually, Amelia did not have a dearth of successful research products that she could profit from. As a top-level plant magic expert, how could she possibly lack research results? However, Amelia lacked people she could trust, so there was no one around her who could advise her on how to manage her finances. She priced all her products at whatever she wanted, and it were the random byproducts from her research that were placed on the shelves of her Thorn Garden store. Whenever she started a new research project, she would never consider how she could make back her money. It was only natural for her to be in such a huge amount of debt. So you and the other wood spirits repriced all the items Amelia left behind in the warehouse. Yep, we used our new techniques to enchant or improve them and also added our wood spirit products as well. Today's the first day we tried this, and it's so popular already. There's also the fact that Mother's store has been closed for so long, so there's a large demand on the market for high quality plant magic goods. The new customers probably heard about us from the returning customers. Seeing the little financial expert Rosa speak so confidently on this subject made me truly feel that Amelia needed to start learning from Rosa. With Rosa's assistance and my special products that should be ready for sale soon, this 100+ years old store, famous for never turning a profit, might soon become one of the top 10 most profitable stores in the Cloud Tower. It could maybe even challenge some of the biggest mage organizations' stores which had been open for more than a millennium. Was it supposed to be unusual for mages to open up their own stores? It did seem wrong that academics needed to be concerned about money, but that was the difference between ideals and reality. Since tuition fees and researching new magic all required large amounts of money and resources, even the richest person would eventually go bankrupt if they only spent money without having any income in return. Mages had to learn how to make money first in order to spend money. Low-ranked mages had their ways to earn money. They could copy and sell magical scrolls or simply work for mid and high-ranked mages. After all, low-ranked mages had less expenditures, so that was plenty for them. Meanwhile, top-ranked mages would typically require several 100,000 gold coins for a research project, where failure meant they would lose their entire investment. Any mage who didn't know how to manage their money would eventually become deeply entrenched in debt, just like Amelia. Actually, just like the researchers in my previous world, it was quite easy for mages to turn their research results into mountains of gold coins. Rechargeable enchantments for weapons and equipment, cannon fodder level magical familiars, potions, newly invented weapons and equipment, various applications of magic in daily life and so on were all fields that were highly profitable. For example, I knew of a mage organization named Dance of Darkness which mostly consisted of mages interested in summoning magic. They were particularly skilled at taming magical beasts. Apart from selling various summoned creatures and contracted magical pets, their horses were so popular that they dominated over 70% of the horse market. That was a long-term, consistent source of income for them. Enchantment specialist mages would open up enchantment stores, while alchemists would never lack money as they were experts in creating magical products and equipment. If you were an archmage with a monopoly on some special technology or product, then you could simply lay in bed and count your money. The archmages who didn't have any research results to sell could hire themselves out as mercenaries or adventurers, and copying high-level magical scrolls was also a well-paid job. As long as a person paid even the slightest attention and, when they were out of money, stopped their research and went to find work for a while, no mage would starve to death. Alright then, I might as well make fun of Amelia a little here. Although she was someone who possessed the emblem of endless truth and plant magic, not to mention that she had a monopoly over the highest level plant magic products, it was quite abnormal how she managed to be so pathetically poor and riddled with debt. And now, with a little helper like Rosa, I wouldn't need to worry about the store anymore. Originally, I had been concerned about whether that group of bastards would be able to run the store. Since I didn't have to worry about the store's daily operations, I could now focus on preparing the products for sale and what new products to develop. But, of course, my goal had never been something as simple as opening a store to make some money. Notes: 1. TL/N. Onishishi is a rather famous Japanese hentai about a father and his daughters. Chapter 299, Bribing. Was the mage country strong? The answer was an obvious yes. However, even though the mage country technically counted as a mega empire, everyone knew that it wasn't even a country. It was simply a place where countless mages gathered. Ignoring the countless mid and low-ranked mages, when one only counted those archmages that had obtained the emblem of endless truth and considered if all these top-level mages acted together in unison. Alright then, Everyone knew that was basically impossible. After all, every mage had their own desires, their own goals in life, and their own research topics they were interested in. Wanting them to act together in unison for a country's goal was unimaginable. This was also the main reason why the mage country had never expanded their territory ever since Arlodent had been founded. They lacked the necessity of expanding their borders. Expand their territory and population? What a joke! There were only so many mages to begin with, and the city of Arlo could contain 90% of the mage country's population itself. Why would they need to expand their territory with nobody to live in it? It would be all the more bothersome for them as they would need to plant more crops and maintain public order in more places. Increase their population in order to increase the number of mages in the mage country? That was unnecessary, as the mage country never cared about what nationality a person was from, nor did they care about a large base population in order to obtain more mages. Anyone willing to abandon an ordinary person's boring life and choose the path of seeking knowledge would easily be able to become a member of the mage country. The forever neutral country, Arlodent. It wasn't particularly because the mage country maintained neutrality, it was that most of the mages in this country, as individuals, consciously chose to remain neutral. This neutrality didn't only extend to wars between countries, it even included the eternal holy war. They didn't favor the order gods, but they also despised the chaos gods. It could be said that they only believed in themselves, that they only cared about magic and the truth. They were the most truly neutral third party in the holy war. Of course, since most mages were humans, it wasn't technically wrong to say that they were in the order faction, but as for having them fight for the order faction, fine, the mage country didn't even have a standing army. At any rate, the mages that cared about order versus chaos and were willing to go fight for their beliefs were free to do so. However, there would be no such collective action taken by the mages as a whole. They're basically allies that were made for us. But just as I mentioned earlier, everyone in the Truth Symposium was an academic who hated politics. In such a situation, something like an alliance was meaningless. An alliance that wouldn't do anything for you was basically no different from scrap paper. There were plenty of ambitious individuals that wanted to borrow the powerful mage country's strength in the past. However, those individuals all failed. No matter how loudly they shouted for assistance, very few mages would come to their aid. But if I had to critique those individuals, I would say that they were too outdated in their methods of thinking. Alliances, inciting the population, bribing higher-ups, and other such typical plots were utterly useless when dealing with the mage country, which had its own unique political system in the world of Ike. As for me, I had my own opinions. We definitely couldn't make a formal alliance of any sort with a mage country that completely lacked any unity as a country. After all, even if we obtained a certain percentage of the truth overseers to support us, all the mage organizations and individual mages wouldn't listen to them. But looking at it from a different standpoint, we could simply bribe every individual mage. As long as we bribed enough mages, the entire mage country was basically on our side. This sounded inconceivable. There were too many individual mages to possibly bribe, but it was actually doable. How does one make an originally neutral person suddenly become your ardent supporter? The answer was quite simple. Just fill that person's wallet with your money or owe him a significant amount of money. Make it so that his and your personal benefits are intimately connected. In that case, how does one make two different factions, or on a much larger scale, two different countries become as one? The answer was still the same. Just make their benefits connected. For example, if they use the same currency, the same language, and had zero trade tariffs for each other, they would stand on the same side for most benefits. They would naturally become one. Back in my original world of Earth, many countries in history used this method to unify two countries. Emperor Qin of China was such an example. He unified Chinese currency and all the Chinese dialects into one, which set the foundation for China to become a nation. Alright then, by now, the idea was obvious. I only had to fulfill two conditions to bribe all the mages to be on my side. First, I needed to make sure their personal benefits were tied to mine. Second, I had to make them into my customers, friends, and even debtors. If I could accomplish this, then they would naturally feel that if they didn't support me, they would be losing out. They would support me of their own volition without me even needing to do anything. Originally, I had only thought about this plan before helplessly giving up on it. The resources and wealth needed would be astronomical. However, a sudden recent event helped make my fantastical dream of bribing the entire mage country's mages to become a possibility. Justice points. Our top level products can only be purchased with justice points, and this is only a beginning. Our final goal is to make the entire mage country use justice points as its most important currency. I was completely confident that with the gods backing me up with their countless years of accumulated treasures, my products and treasury would make any mage go crazy with desire. Yet this was only a beginning. According to my plan, in the future, more and more stores would be using justice points as their currency. My most important goal was to make the majority of people in the mage country admit and think that justice points were the most valuable currency of all. They would then automatically join as contract mages and fight for our cause in order to obtain justice points. That would help us obtain countless powerful contract mages. If a sufficient number of mages sought justice points and joined in battle, the entire mage country would gradually transform into my ally even without a formal alliance agreement. Of course, realizing this goal still required countless steps and little tricks, such as how to make the mage country recognize justice points as their official currency, how to make other stores and mages want to use justice points as their currency, and how to ensure that the major mage organizations wouldn't interfere with justice points as my system expanded. However, I had both confidence and patience. I could take things slowly here. Neutral? Soon, you'll discover that, in this war, there's no such thing as being neutral. This time, I definitely won't repeat the mistakes of the past. In the game's history, the mage country was just as strong as the current mage country right now. However, the story's version of the mage country chose as always to ignore the holy war, despite all the changes occurring in the world and all the death being wrought. They chose to simply remain as observers that would record what happened. They remained neutral as always. No, neutral was no longer sufficient to describe them. They were arrogant, dense, and cold-hearted. Well, since the mage country was able to ignore even the Young-Eye Calamity and other similar large-scale battles in the past, it was only natural that they would simply ignore everything that happened in the Holy War. Even though everyone was at war around them, they chose to remain in the Cloud Tower and go about their daily lives, discussing their newest technological inventions or how bad the weather was. But, when the Holy War truly ended up involving the entire world, they finally discovered that they were caught up in the war as well. Yet Armageddon had already descended upon them, and it was too late to take action. To be fair, even in the game's storyline, there were perceptive mages that sounded warnings, and the mages stationed in other dimensions had reported on how the creatures from other planes were gathering their forces in an abnormally large-scale fashion. However, all the large mage organizations had already come to a conclusion because of the past. They had etched into their minds that this would simply be another 200 or 300-year war between different species. They would just need to ignore this war like always. But the arrogant mages tasted bitter defeat and death in the end. When Arlodent finally realized that something was wrong with the situation and truly commanded all the mages to begin participating in the war, the entire land of Ike had experienced endless battle, and countless powerful existences had already descended upon Ike from other planes. The river Styx was filled with the souls of the dead, with semi-god existences enjoying their wine glasses filled with human blood wrought from catastrophe. The demons and devils had organized themselves into colossal armies under the leadership of the evil gods, and those powerful mages were unable to do anything at all. Sometimes, remaining neutral seems like it can't possibly be a wrong decision. However, it's also the most passive choice, which makes it the farthest possible answer from the correct decision. Although I didn't want to admit it, from a certain standpoint, it was a good thing for me that the Bardi Empire began a war against the mage country. At the very least, the Bardi Empire informed the mages that remained in their ivory towers that there was no such thing as absolute peace in the world. Even if you remained as a hermit in your own home, it was possible that one day, a robber would break into your home and slap you in the face. I truly looked forward to the next Truth Symposium conference scheduled to take place in slightly over 1 month from now. I wanted to see what the archmages that returned from the front lines of battle would have to say. Also, I wanted to know more about the sudden forbidden spill ambush on the Bardi Empire's front lines. This didn't seem like the mage country's typical style of doing things at all. so I couldn't comprehend what had happened. There was definitely something interesting behind that, a plot I hadn't yet uncovered. What I currently needed to do was forcefully wake them up to the situation. Justice points and the magical secrets that they could exchange for would be the bait to get them involved. As long as enough mages were involved, there would be a sufficient number of reports sent to the Truth Symposium about the scale of destruction and chaos in the Holy War. With the mages' intelligence, it would be impossible for them to not notice and ignore the danger with so much information stuffed in their faces. By that time, the entire mage country would nationally become my ally. Was it going to be difficult to bait the mages? Ha ha. Would a mage have no desires? Impossible. I had always believed that the seemingly calm mages were actually the easiest job class to tempt of all. Greed Harl always was a classic example of a mage. Her endless greed and desire for magical knowledge was an accurate stereotype of the mages. I had already purchased a large advertisement in next week's Cloud Tower Weekly magazine, which would give a detailed introduction of Thorn Garden and our new products, even including a full list of every item one could exchange for with justice points. The items that came from ancient times or were God's secrets were precious goods that nobody would be able to obtain otherwise. There was nothing that could compete with the unknown in attracting mages due to their desire and thirst for knowledge. Justice points would definitely cause many mages to act. With justice points as the bait, my final goal was to wake the mage country up to the danger they were in and act much sooner than they would have otherwise. However, things had to be taken slowly. This plot of mine, which was completely out in the open and had nothing nefarious about it compared to my usual plots, was one that could be taken slowly. As for how to drag the mage country into the holy war with me, I first needed to make the Thorn Garden as popular as possible. Plant magic products would have a limited market appeal. If I wanted to attract the entire Cloud Tower's attention, it would be insufficient to utilize Amelia's products alone. My new products were now prepared, and I could even make a huge profit while obtaining my goal. Mechanized mage squadrons? That seems like it would make for such an unusual art style. Archmage Andre was currently in a bad mood. The vice leader of the Sword of Order, he was a mage who had the goal of raising the strongest magical pets possible. He felt like he had been away from his favorite lovely experimental laboratory for far too long. His clumsy acolytes wouldn't even dare approach his precious pets' cages, so he was afraid that maybe a few of his treasured pets might have already starved to death. However, I sense that my little preciouses are under threat from something far more dangerous than starvation. How strange. Is there some dangerous existence currently at the Cloud Tower? However, Andre knew that it wasn't time to consider such things as he looked at the thick sandstorm and smoke in front of him. The endless sounds of dragons roaring could be heard in the distance. Ever since that forbidden spell transformed this area on the Bardi Empire's front lines into a living hell, 2 small squadrons of Bardi Empire Dragon Knights had already arrived, the Western Dragon Knights loyal to Orlos, not Halen's squadron. The 12 Dragon Knights' constant ambushes were quite difficult to defend against. Still, this wasn't a big problem. There were a total of 4 Truth Overseers in this area. If they combined their powers and forced the Bardi Empire's Dragon Knights into a direct confrontation, the Truth Overseers would likely win quite quickly. However, both sides were in a stalemate for various reasons. The Archmages here didn't want to escalate the level of the war, nor did they want to slay the dragons and Dragon Knights, which would antagonize all the dragons behind the Dragon Knights. Meanwhile, Bardi's Dragon Knights seemed to be acting strangely as well. While they still kept on with their ambushes lacked actual attack power. The largest scale attack they used would be a single dragon breath, which it would set a few structures on fire. As they were the ones supposed to be taking revenge here, this was obviously far too peaceful. It feels like they're under some sort of restraint as well, and they don't intend to escalate the level of this conflict, either. I don't understand what's happening. Yet soon, Archmage Andre didn't have to worry about things on the front line anymore. He received a letter from the Cloud Tower. Chapter 300, Iron Horses. Boom, 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 boom. It had become quite common to hear sounds of explosions in the streets of Arlo as of late. Young mages would ride mechanical iron horses on the streets, chasing and racing each other and leaving nothing but dust and smoke in their wake. These iron horses were equipped with steel wheels, which left behind marks in Arlo's ancient streets. Sounds of excited laughter could be heard as young mages reveled in the thrill of moving at high speeds. Winds, whipped up by these iron horses, would flip ladies' skirts as they passed by, resulting in storms of curses everywhere. Public order officials who came investigating would only meet black smoke, leaving them coughing in anger. Unfortunately for them, license plates weren't yet a concept in this world. It was impossible to easily identify the owners of the iron horses. The riders broke the speed records over and over again as they improved their techniques. Iron horses could be seen chasing after others on the street, causing loud disturbances, and soon it became considered both popular and fashionable among the youth. They've taken to racing. They caused enough traffic accidents in 1 week that you typically deal with in 1 year. Does that have anything to do with me? I'm just a merchant doing perfectly legal business. If someone killed another person with a vegetable knife, are you going to arrest all the merchants that sell vegetable knives? Cher, the female mage in charge of public order, was furious. Her veins were bulging as she glared at the young appearing mage, who had such an uncaring expression. Still, she was helpless. She couldn't do anything about it. This wasn't her first time dealing with this archmage before her, after all. In just 1 week, this archmage had come to the police station 9 times to bail out his companions ever since their first meeting. Although none of his subordinates would do anything too nefarious, they would constantly break records for how shameless they could get and how creative they could be with their shamelessness. There was especially a certain Draken who was now basically treating the jail as his home. He arrived at their jail every single day. On top of that, although Cher wasn't sure what he did, all the other imprisoned criminals had furiously begged the police mages to save them and not put them in the same jail cell as him. I think it's probably safer for my well-being to stay here in jail." When she asked the Draken, that seemingly honest individual actually trembled in fear. He had apparently antagonized an inestimable number of people. But when she checked his records, she discovered to her surprise that he was a saint-ranked beast tamer, hunter. Did that mean that in just 1 short week he successfully antagonized myth-ranked and perhaps even semi-god-ranked mages? As for the others, they continued to sell their fake products, go around naked, cause explosions or simply fights. In short, all sorts of other troubles. If it wasn't for this archmage bailing them out every time, Cher would have long since made them rot in jail. Today, however, was different. Cher could no longer tolerate this anymore. Perhaps it was true that the morals of one's subordinates didn't mean that the boss was the same, and it seemed to her that his feelings of awkwardness and depression at their mayhem were real. However, when he had to come the very next day, or even on the afternoon of the same day to bail out his subordinates yet again, not only did that make people suspect his sincerity in saying "I'll make sure to manage them properly," it also made people suspect if his group of subordinates were actually some professional criminal organization or if they were intentionally giving the police mages and public order mages trouble on purpose. Yet this was all merely a small aside for the waves that Thorn Garden had caused in mage society. Thanks to the cute wood spirit employees at the newly renovated Thorn Garden, the store had become rapidly popular with female mages. Even those who weren't interested in plant magic would spend an entire day in the Forest Coffee Cafe attached to the store and watch the cute little wood spirits scurry around for several hours without getting tired. Of course, there were also male mages and even some elderly mages with white hair who tried this as well. However, most of them would soon escape. They would be unable to withstand the numerous glares from the female mages. While the female mages and acolytes treated the Forest Coffee Cafe as a holy grounds for relaxation, the male mages had a new toy to play around with as well. Iron Horse number 7 was the name of my new product and was behind the black smoke, noise pollution, and traffic accidents throughout in the streets of Arlo. Iron horses were similar to rocket cars built by Gnome Engineering, but it possessed only 2 wheels. After all, Yingdu demanded additional money for training wheels. And while everyone was still suspecting whether these iron horses would even function properly, the gnomes that acted as the demonstrators began a fast-paced race in front of everyone. At first, the mages all thought that this would be another new miraculous but dangerous gnome invention. They all brought snacks and prepared themselves to see some fireworks. However, they were astonished to see that apart from a few gnomes that lost control and caused traffic accidents, none of the iron horses self-destructed at all. This was utterly unlike what they knew about gnome technology. Soon, a young, relatively rich mage was unable to resist the temptation of his curiosity. He purchased an iron horse despite its expensive price with the intent to take it apart for research, not to ride it. And when he took it apart in public in front of everyone, the entire cloud tower was shaken by the news. A mega small energy battery. And it's actually so stable. How is it possible? No, it's probably just a rechargeable cycle. Who cares about how it works? It's fine as long as it does what it's supposed to do. It would seem that Archmage Hesta and Archmage DR researched in the wrong direction on how to develop smaller batteries. They didn't need to create new energy sources for small batteries. Only storage capacity and rechargeability were necessary. Olive's magic box was indeed an invention that would change the times. From the very start, the biggest drawback of gnome engineering wasn't even the inconsistent explosions, it was the lack of consistent and long-term energy. If one used a special, powerful magic creature's magic core as the energy source, not only would that incur incredibly high costs, but the magic core would eventually run out of energy. Whatever it powered would become nothing more than scrap metal until the owner obtained another magic core with similar properties. Once the issue of a reliable source of long-term energy was taken care of and mass-produced under my design and direction, I nationally decided to create metallic motorcycles for people to ride. It was also within my expectations that the mages would soon notice the critical new technology within the iron horses. After all, the research project of inventing a smaller portable battery already had two emblem of truth level archmages, Hesta and Dia, competing against each other. However, neither of them had made much progress. From the very start, both of them were researching in the wrong direction. Mages were quite familiar with the concept of batteries. Every mage tower had its own large-scale batteries to back up the mana reserves. There were many different types of batteries that all worked differently, and some were even capable of magically receiving energy from different dimensions. With the support of these batteries, a high-level mage could practically have limitless mana within his or her own mage tower. It would be a conservative estimate to say that the mage would have their power multiplied threefold. Never attack a mage when they're in their mage tower. This was one of the most common sayings among adventurers. Any who dared to break this common sense had already died off. Mages had always researched how to make their batteries much smaller and portable, as this would obviously help increase a mage's strength when they traveled outside. However, they had kept researching about batteries through the soul, or from natural phenomenon, or from alchemy. It was evident that no mage had ever thought about researching batteries through the field of engineering that had absolutely nothing to do with magic. With mages' current techniques, even their smallest battery was the size of an average room in a house. For quite a long time now, making batteries any smaller than that was basically viewed as impossible. After all, opening up a stable portal to another dimension or absorbing energy from a powerful energy-producing creature would all require a significant amount of space. From a certain standpoint, although they were all academic seekers of the truth, magicians, alchemists, and scientists would look at the same issue from different angles. Well, in truth, nobody was right or wrong about it. Even the most basic magic spells used by mages would violate what engineers knew about the most basic laws of energy and conservation and so on. They were direct opposites from the very start. It would be like trying to make a chicken communicate with a duck. Based on the logic that batteries needed to be medium-sized or huge, mages only considered how to obtain more energy from the same size, trying to create a perpetual motion machine. However, they didn't consider that it would be enough to store sufficient energy to create a self-sustaining cycle that would only need occasional recharging. Since the mages were never researching the right topic to improve batteries in the first place, and they lacked the theoretical scientific knowledge about batteries, for them to actually produce results would be no different from winning the lottery. Now, however, this famous research topic that everyone had thought was impossible actually produced results. Top-level mages who had made this their lifetime goal lost to gnome engineering technology, as evidenced by the indisputable fact before everyone's eyes. Even the calmest mage would be unable to handle this. Take it apart. Yes, take it apart. With the passionate observers egging him on, the Iron Horse owner, who showed everyone what was inside, excitedly prepared to take the battery apart so that everyone could research it together. However, he discovered that there was a complex magical seal on it that was even labeled with the gnome's safety brand. Of course, this was merely a small issue that wouldn't be difficult for the mages to deal with at all. And so, with the help of some onlooking archmages, this small magical seal was forcefully broken through. And then, well, there was no more than boom. Well, it wasn't really a big deal. Mages were quite well versed in all sorts of magical traps. This magical seal was designed so that if it was forcefully broken through using magic, a magical keyboard with numbers 0 to 9 would appear, and the correct 20-digit password needed to be inputted within 10 seconds. Even if you knew the password, you would need to have a high typing speed. Since mages were typically non-athletic, this would be quite difficult for them. Alright. Should I say that the mages were quite used to dealing with explosions in the process of their research? Or should I say that Jinya and the gnomes had some moral boundaries after all? At the very least, the explosions caused by the breaking of the battery's defenses weren't very powerful. Not a single mage died from these explosions. But, from a certain standpoint, mages were truly rich. News soon started spreading that the Iron Horse number 7 possessed small, portable batteries, and the rather expensive iron horses were sold out in just a single afternoon. And then, during the entire night, explosions could be heard from all over the city. Before the skies even lightened, there was a long customer line of blackened individuals standing in front of Thorn Garden, waiting for it to open so that they could purchase more iron horses. Of course, once top-level archmages started taking an interest in this, the gnomes' mechanisms wouldn't be able to obstruct them for long. It would only be a matter of time before they figured out this technology. However, this was a technology I was intending to sell to them anyways. By the time they figured the battery technology out, I would have made massive profits off the iron horses. Meanwhile, for the mages that weren't researching how to take the iron horses apart, they naturally tried riding the motorcycles, using the iron horses as they were intended to be used. And soon, they discovered additional benefits. It's so steady. It's a lot steadier than a horse. And it's so quick. Long distance traveling was considered an unpleasant task as most mages had below average constitutions. In their eyes, this strange new invention was far more comfortable than a real horse, and it was a lot steadier as well. But if its only use was comfort, that wouldn't be all that important to them. I can actually cast magic while sitting on this. Total concentration was required for a mage to cast magic. It typically required a few seconds of blocking out the outside world. If a mage was riding a horse that jostled their body back and forth, it would be quite difficult for them to concentrate. The fact that these iron horses could be ridden so smoothly attracted many mages' attention. Mages' biggest weakness was doubtlessly the fact that they themselves were typically quite slow. If a warrior was able to close the distance, increasing that distance between them would be incredibly troublesome. It would be no exaggeration to say that a mage's combat strength would be doubled if they were able to cast spells while moving at high speed. However, even for combat mages that were specialists in practical combat, it would still be difficult for them to master casting spells while moving. They would only be able to cast spells at slow speeds. If they tried casting spells while riding in a horse-drawn carriage, with those wooden wheels and a lack of shock absorbers, anyone would be constantly jostled up and down. A single bump in the road could be the cause of a fatal magical backlash. There was indeed one type of steed that was steady enough for mages to sit upon and easily cast spells from: dragons. However, those would be incredibly difficult to obtain. And so, being able to cast spells while moving at a high speed was considered impractical. Yet the mages soon found out that it was quite easy to cast spells while sitting on the Iron Horse motorcycle or riding in its sidecar. Meanwhile, Thorn Garden's first advertisement for the Iron Horse was published, with the catchphrase being "Make those muscleheads forever eat our dust." In order to prove the veracity of the advertisement's claim, the 4 elemental sword casters that came from the Northlands rode some of the Iron Horse motorcycles on the streets. They perfectly displayed the motorcycle's excellent shock-absorbing functions and the possibility of casting spells while moving at such high speeds. After all, Only mages knew what mages really wanted. This seemingly insignificant toy was actually a tool that could greatly increase mages' power and survivability when traveling outside. That was how Iron Horse number 7 became the first successful part of my plan in conquering the market in the mage country. Young people rapidly learned how to drive motorcycles and got rid of the training wheels that they considered useless. They even began racing each other on the streets, giving public order mages like Cher endless headaches. Meanwhile, the older mages spent money on hiring drivers so that they could enjoy the feeling and the wind from the motorcycle's sidecars. In fact, have you bought one yet? And how many did you buy? Became a common greeting for the mages during this time. Meanwhile, Thorn Garden had an exceedingly long line forever waiting at the door. And this was just the beginning. 2 days later, the mages were almost at the level of fighting each other to buy iron horses. Since I made it a limited product where we would sell only 100 iron horses per day, they would always be sold out on the same day despite the high price I set. The most important part was that I made yet another new advertisement for Thorn Garden. It stated that in 1 month's time, Thorn Garden would only be accepting justice points as payment for the iron horses in the future. Justice points? I've heard about those. During the gods' proclamations, right? They seem easy to obtain. But how am I supposed to get them so quickly? Doesn't this basically mean that the iron horses will only be sold for 1 month? This helped sell the iron horses even quicker than before. Those who successfully purchased iron horses showed them off on the streets, which only increased everyone's desire to purchase one. In fact, the archmages were willing to exchange their precious treasures to get on the reservation list. While I wasn't black-hearted enough to further increase the iron horse's price, I made a huge profit by simply selling reservation list positions for the right to purchase an iron horse. This was quite the excellent sales tactic. The only type of products capable of competing in profitability with excellent quality and cheap or fresh and interesting would be limited edition, first come first served and impossible to find in the future. Meanwhile, on the other hand of things, the huge increase in the number of motorcycle races on the streets made Cher, who represented both the police and public order mages, become greatly angered at both me and my products. As I looked at the blue-haired girl before me puffing her cheeks in anger, I felt a headache as well. After all, if at all possible, I didn't want to antagonize this mage country governmental public security department. I should mention that public security in the Cloud Tower was taken care of by 2 different departments. One was a more typical police station-like department for public security, while the other consisted of internal mage organizations' public order squadrons. While the police mages would take care of incidents both small and large, it was evident that normal executors of the law would be unable to rein in all the mages. That was why the mage organization's public order squadrons were in charge of internally policing the organization's member mages that crossed the line with criminal actions. Of course, since police mages and public order mages had similar tasks to begin with, many mages worked part-time in both departments. This was especially so since many public order mages had lots of free time when they didn't have any particular troublemaking mage that they needed to investigate. Cher Allen, this female mage before me, was not only a member of the police mages but also one of the high-ranking public order officers in the Mystic Guild Blade's internal public order division. She had nicknames given to her by others such as Iron Girl and Iron Throat. Alright then, when the word iron was used to describe a girl like her, it was evident that it wouldn't mean anything complimentary. She was evidently the icy and stubborn type, and, in a way, also showed how she was overly serious. Every time I bailed my underlings out from her jail, I experienced her more and more severe lectures. Her original respect towards my status as an archmage had vanished, and whenever she looked at me, I felt like she was treating me as human scum. And whenever I successfully bailed my subordinates out, she would shout at me, just like how a passionate detective would shout in an old police story at the sly criminal, "I'll definitely find the evidence to put you in jail." Why did I mysteriously become the sly antagonist criminal? Was I really someone who had a legendary face that attracted aggro, one naturally and created crimes by simply existing? Just as I was hesitating over what method I should use to fool the passionate detective before me, the clamorous sounds of fighting rang out behind me, followed by a large explosion from the warehouse. A new trouble had come looking for me. Notes: 1. Ed/N In an MMORPG, when you piss off an NPC non-player character, and it enters a combat state with your character, it is also an informal British word that means aggressive, violent behavior.